His life was a failure. And then for 2,000 years, Kakyu ruled the depths of hell as a lower demon who clawed his way to unmatched power. When fate cast him into another world, he finally found the peaceful life he'd always dreamed of. But peace never lasts. The village he swore to protect burned, leaving only one survivor, a boy named Ars. Now the demon who once brought despair to millions will raise this child to be the happiest and strongest person alive. Is he forging the world's savior or his own executioner? Let's find out. This story is about Kakyu, a former Japanese who reincarnated as a lower devil in hell. He sat on a slain dragon, ate the meat and shouted, as expected, "Roasted thunder dragon meat is the best." He made a great souvenir for the villagers. Later, he was riding a cart towards the village. June 1013, on the sacred calendar, Join Village, an agricultural stronghold in the western lands of the Zogul Kingdom. Meanwhile, the village was going on with its usual measured life. Children were running, playing, men were doing various jobs. A guard was sitting and yawning at the entrance to the village. He said how hungry he was, then heard the sound of an approaching cart, looked into the distance and shouted, "Kakyu." The protagonist waved his hand and shouted back, "Hi, Grandpa. Are you still alive?" The guard replied, "What is he talking about? He is full of strength even at night." Kakyu got off the cart and shouted for him to stop. He made him imagine it. He laughed in response. Then the protagonist took out a coin, handed it to him and said, "Here is his entrance fee." Grandpa raised his hand, did not agree, loudly replied that he did not need it. He was already like one of their own in their village. Kakyu seriously replied that this would not work and asked, "Rules are rules, right? A rule is like a promise to yourself, and he always keeps them to the end." Later there was a celebration, and the whole village gathered, happily ate the meat that he cooked. One of the villagers raised a mug up and shouted, "Very tasty." The protagonist held out a tray with meat and shouted, "Today he is treating them so that they can eat as much as they want." One of the guests shouted, "He is so generous, Kakyu." Arno stood up, pointed towards the meat and asked, "Is he sure he wants to give that much meat? It looks very high quality, and there is a lot of it. What animal is it from?" MC scratched his chin and answered, "A thunder dragon." Arno was indignant, told him to stop lying. The protagonist got angry and shouted, "He is not lying. He hunted it himself." He continued that he will never be able to defeat the legendary dragon. Then Alma came up, grabbed the protagonist by the hand and shouted, "Enough, that's it. Her Kakyu never lied to anyone." He wiped the tears from his eyes and said, "She is his only ally, Alma." Arno grabbed him by the neck, pointed at him and said, "Father will never give the go-ahead for this. Never." So that she would look at this scoundrel. Slanted eyes, smirk, stupid hairstyle. All scammers are like that. At this time, Jules came up to them and brought mugs of beer and suggested that they think about it. An excellent candidate. He has money to burn. He can afford such meat. Arno told her to wait, Jules. Alma shouted, "That's right." One of the villagers laughed and shouted. They drove him into a corner. "Arno," he added, "so be it. He also blesses this union, Kakyu, so that he takes his great-granddaughter." The girl shouted, "Grandfather." The protagonist laughed and he continued, "So it was decided by a majority vote." The protagonist shouted, "It's not that simple." Later, when almost everyone left, Arno was taking the rest of the meat, turned to the protagonist and asked, would he stay again today? He wiped the table and asked, "Does he mind?" He would be very grateful. She was happy and shouted, "Hooray!" At this time, Jules was bent over in the corner of the room, holding her stomach and moaning. Arno saw and shouted, "Is she okay, Jules? She's pregnant, so she should rest." At this time, the protagonist came up and asked how the baby was feeling. She held her stomach with her hand and answered, "Too energetic. All thanks to the meat he brings." "And when will the baby be born?" Jules answered that she thought in a month. The protagonist raised his hand to his chin and thoughtfully said, "Well, in a month, as soon as he finishes all his business with trade, he will definitely visit them again." They all smiled, and Jules said, "Okay, she's sure the child will be glad to see him too." He reached his room, fell face down on the bed, and said that he was tired, then lay down more comfortably and began to reason. Although what a miracle it is that he can live such an ordinary life. A long time ago, having interrupted his earthly path in Japan for numerous sins committed during his life, he was cast into hell and by some miracle was reborn as a demon. From then on, his life became a torment. Hell was full of demons and monsters, and he was constantly at risk of being killed by more powerful demons. Because of the petty quarrels between the god of hell and the god of heaven, wars between heaven and hell constantly broke out, and he was always on the verge of death. There was no talk of peace. And yet, for 2,000 long years, he tried his best to survive, and somehow he managed to gain the wisdom and strength needed to survive in hell. However, the supreme god of heaven folded his arms and shouted, "It's time to pay. He's a bastard." The supreme god of hell stretched out his hand and laughed and shouted, "He'll send him to the next world, you old goat." He thought he didn't have time to knock him down. The god of heaven swung and struck, and the god of hell was able to hold back the blow, and the battle continued. He realized that this time it was finally over. 2,000 years of torment. He tried, but he woke up, and now he is in another world, alien to our Earth. It took time to comprehend the current situation, but having taken the form of a man, he traveled around the world, exploring it. 3 years ago, he found this village, and, pretending to be a wanderer who lost his memory, studied the language and culture. Now he is a traveling merchant. To be honest, he thinks that he is too lucky. Everything is so good that sometimes it seems to him that he is still sleeping. After all, 2,000 years is an eternity. Literally experienced all the circles of hell. The fact that he now does not hide from the fear of death every day and can eat normally and sleep in a bed, is this not enough luck? Moreover, thanks to these 2,000 years in this other world, he became something like in those old novels he once read, he is too cool and all? Yeah, this is just a bonus level in his demonic life. He raised his head up and shouted, finally the dream of a quiet life will come true. You can't miss the opportunity to have fun. He laughed loudly. At this time, Alma brought him water and looked at him in surprise. He cleared his throat, then asked, Alma, why did she come to him? She became embarrassed and said, Mom asked me to bring him water. He thanked her and said that he was just dying of thirst. She continued embarrassedly and also handed him gloves and shouted, Here. She asked him to take them. He took them in his hands and asked, Gloves? She agreed, then added, she made them herself. Her dad advised her to. They say that merchants get calluses on their palms from constantly pulling on their horses' reins, but he doesn't seem to be wearing gloves. The hero tried these on and shouted, they fit him just right. They feel nice, and they're bright red too. It must have been difficult to make them. Well done, Alma. She raised her hand behind her head, smiled and said, Oh, no problem. You're welcome. He smiled and said, Oh, he'll treasure them, and thanked Alma. She smiled, raised her head and shouted, Nothing's too much for my future husband. Then she headed for the exit, started closing the door and said, He's it. Then she won't disturb him while he rests. He agreed and thanked her again. He sat on the bed, looked at the gloves on his hands, and thought that she would forgive him. Alma, but he's a demon. He can't have calluses on his hands, and he can't marry her. She ran home contentedly, hugged her mother and thought, what is it like to have a family? And he lay and thought, eternity is his only legacy. He does not know what the count of years is. For him, a demon, time is an endless river. The next morning they were sitting and having breakfast, and Arno asked if they were going fishing after breakfast. Then he noticed the gloves on his hands and thought, it looks like Alma gave him the gloves after all. Later they were sitting with fishing rods on a log. The protagonist showed him the gloves and said in a satisfied voice, Yes, she did a great job. Arno replied, Ah, how great. He would like to have some like those too. Then he remembered and added, even if his daughter said something about marriage, that will never happen. The protagonist looked at him, got angry and asked, what the hell is he talking about? Then he thought, he's not stupid. What is he saying? Then Arno got angry and shouted, so he thinks that Alma has no attractiveness? MC replied, damn, he doesn't want to become his son-in-law, so he'll calm down. He replied, at least they have something in common. The protagonist continued, and anyway, what good could Alma find in someone like him? He replied, yes, only that he saved her life, a kind of reason for marriage. Alma was frail from birth. They said that she would not live to be 10 years old. Didn't he notice how she always tried to look cheerful in public? And at home, she spent almost all her time in bed. But it's been about 1.5 years since he returned from his first trip. She started eating meat and spices. He remembers the first time he set foot on their land. He didn't know what to expect from him then, but now he's grateful to him, Kakyu. And not only he, the whole village is grateful to him. He only had bad memories, he thought. It's all because of him, and now they're grateful to him. Arno raised his fishing rod and shouted, come on, and told him to listen, Kakyu. He asked, will they get to the point? He caught a fish, showed it to the protagonist, and continued. So, an order came from the capital. He was being taken into the army. Kakyu asked, why suddenly? He answered, no, he was always in reserve. Demons have become active in the Urals lately. Then he asked, he's a merchant. Haven't heard anything about this? He thought about it. He usually moves through portals, so he didn't notice anything. Arno continued, and now, if something happens to him, he wants to ask him to look after Ars and Alma. The protagonist asked in surprise, Ars? Is this Juice's child? He realizes that's a boy's name, right? And the gender of the child is still unknown. He disagreed and added, this time it's definitely a boy. He can feel it. Okay, the protagonist said, but don't entrust them to him. Come on, don't. Arno replied, just in case he knows his father was eaten by demons. You never know what can happen. The protagonist asked, is he sure he wants this? He agreed and added that he wants him to look after them. He concluded, but he makes no promises to him. After a while, Kakyu put the last bag in the cart and thought, only 30,000 reals. He thanked him. He replied, you're welcome. Alma asked, when will he come back next time? He replied, probably at the end of next month. He will come see her little brother. Then he knelt down and said, and also, Alma. She came up to him, he put a necklace on her neck and added, "It is a necklace made of dragon scales, a token of gratitude for the gloves, so that she would take care of herself." He got into the carriage, turned around and saw how people had gathered to see him off. They were shouting, "Kakyu-san," and thanking him, and Alma was waving her hand at him. With the help of magic, he quickly teleported to the city, walked through the market, bought goods. After that, he found himself not far from the city, stood and looked at the road. July. The city of Viperna, the capital of the Dragon Kingdom of Gizaria. The protagonist entered the administration. One of the employees pointed to the table with her hand and said, "Here is his certificate for promotion to a mid-level merchant and a bill of exchange. Now he can do business with aristocrats." She congratulates him. He scratches his head and thanks her. Later he goes into the store, looks at the goods, and the saleswoman asks, "Made of dark fabrics, how does he like it?" He scratches his chin and says, "Okay, he'll take it. Great. A gold coin, please." She looks at the shirt and says, "But that he is already of an intermediate level." She thought he was still a beginner. He laughs and says, he will have fun when he returns to the village. She asks, "By the way, he is from the Urals, right? Be careful there. An expedition of holy knights has left for there, now." The protagonist asks in surprise, "Holy knights? Why?" She asks, "Does he not know? They say that holy knights blessed by the goddess can sense the presence of demons. Every few years, they are allowed to conduct a special expedition to the neighboring countries to destroy all the demons that are hiding. That's what the rumors say." Protagonist held his chin in his hand and thought, taking advantage of the fact that people are unable to sense the presence of a demon, the holy knights slander the villages, accusing them of witchcraft, and under this pretext, they carry out robberies. She raised her hand and advised him to be careful when he returned to the Urals. He quickly left, then stood around the corner, stretched out his hand and said, "Mana summoning." And when it got dark, he went to get his cart, began to lead the ox and thought, use teleportation magic in the middle of the city. He would not want to do this, but he has no choice. He has such an unpleasant premonition. He used magic, and he immediately found himself near the village. He moved the tall grass with his hand and saw some smoke, then ran on and noticed how smoke was billowing out of his village. He frowned and thought, smoke? Fire? No, anything but that. He ran towards the village and thought to calm down. Maybe it wasn't that bad. The smoke could be from cooking. They often burn grass in these parts, although yes, it was clearly not the season. If it was a fire, he could handle it. He thought that the guard would be sleeping as always. Alma would run towards him with her father. But no, there was a whole wall of fire in front of him. Walking further, he saw dead villagers on the ground. He fell to his knees and screamed hysterically, then looked around and saw his dead grandfather. Arno and Jules came closer and saw Alma. What happened? Who did this? The protagonist screamed for an explanation. After that, he used the Devil's Eye, soul observation abilities. MC saw the souls leaving people's bodies. Then an image flashed through his mind. The villagers kneel before the holy knights and shout, "Holy knights, wait! They don't know anything about demons." The knights galloped forward and shouted for them not to lie. There was clearly a demonic presence in this village. And also this meat. Isn't this dragon meat? Without the magical abilities inherent in demons, it is impossible to kill a dragon. One knight raised a spear to Arno and barked, "If he is innocent, then let him tell where he got this meat from." Arno said this and fell silent. The knight looked at him and asked, "Is he obviously covering for someone?" Then the knights shouted, "These are the demon's minions, that they must be killed." He came to his senses, leaned over her and asked, were they protecting him? Why did this happen to him? In his past life, he saw his father's death. Kakyu thought he couldn't save anyone again. He got angry and yelled, "Are they kidding?" Yes, they are. Then, with the help of magic, the Devil's Eye, Soul Seeker, he found traces of the expedition. The protagonist concentrated energy in his hand and sent a flash of energy into the sky. The projectile flew far ahead. Everyone paid attention to it. The flash reached the knights. One turned around and loudly asked, "What's there?" Another asked, "What do you want?" "Get lost." The first added, "He is the commander." A powerful explosion was created. The protagonist thought, for 2,000 years he wandered through the bottomless abyss of hell, where every moment was saturated with the pain of loss. There is no place for hope, only eternal darkness, hunger and thirst for death. He became a shadow of himself, a monster devoid of any humanity. He defiled souls and devoured flesh. He turned himself into a creature worthy only of hell. And this village became the first victim of his fall. He was going to use them to get information, and if they interfered, he would kill them all. However, he felt so good, laughing without mocking, enjoying delicious food, feeling the warmth of other people's hands. He experienced all this for the first time in 2,000 years. It was priceless. And they, the gods of hell, want to take even this away from him. If he still loses, then the demon took possession of him more and more. He thought, everything is broken. Really, he still resisted and said, "No, it's not like that." and the thoughts of the devil filled his head, so that he remembered, Kakyu, what is he? Throwing his body, he rose to his full height and screamed, he is the devil, and began to make a terrible roar. Somewhere far away in his thoughts, he remembered his communication with Alma. She held his hand and he said, yes, he understands that he was wrong, but he can no longer stop this process. Such is his true nature. Then he asked, perhaps he disappointed her? She shook her head, denying it. He knelt down in front of her, apologized and said that now he had nothing left. For him, they were the only family. So she stretched out her arms to him, pressed him to herself and noticed that he should listen. Could he hear? Suddenly he heard a child crying nearby, saw a box, opened it, and there was a small child crying. He gradually began to turn into a man again, looked and saw the necklace that he gave to Alm, and thought in surprise, when was he born, baby? Had a month already passed? He remembered their conversation with Arno when he asked, he understands that this is a boy's name, right? And the gender is still unknown. Arno did not agree and added, this time it is definitely a boy. He feels it. He asked, is he sure he wants this? He agreed. At that moment, the main character took the child in his arms, cried, pressed him to himself and thought, ours. This will be his unbreakable oath. The demon Kakyu will make ours his son and raise him as the happiest man in the world. He swears on his soul. The protagonist lifted the child up and thought, Arno, he is very sorry that he couldn't give him his promise that time. But now he promises, don't worry ours. From now on, his life will be full of happy moments, because the devil's promise is unbreakable. At that time, the god of hell and the god of heaven were sitting and playing chess. The god of heaven exclaimed, what an idiot he is. The god of hell added, what kind of devil would make a contract, put his soul as payment? The god of heaven asked, probably some lower devil Kakyu. The god of hell agreed with him and added, that's right. It was because of him that he was able to go to this world, idiot. The bowels of hell. He said he had so much hope for him. The god of hell continued, after all, he was the only one of his kind, a lower demon who had never died in 2,000 years and achieved power comparable to that of higher demons. He replied that he knew, but if this lower demon dared to harm another world, he would burn the hellish land to the ground, exterminate all its servants. He laughed and asked, is this sarcasm? He already destroyed them. The god of hell laughed and shouted, they will see, old man. That fool picked up a human cub. The god of heaven smirked and said, what an irony of fate, because in the future this child will kill Kakyu. The protagonist took the child, and they walked away. The road that the demon and the human child walk. Magic world, royal residence. Demon King Zel Melkinos, Lucifer sat on his throne and asked, so, is this all true? The servant agreed and added, His Majesty, his subordinate who was monitoring the actions of the Holy Knights, personally witnessed it, so there is no doubt. He answered, I see. It is possible that there is someone who is not inferior to him in strength, and perhaps even superior. Then he turned and said, His Majesty, by order of the Insect Lord, an investigation team was formed and has already been sent to the scene. The Demon King raised his hand to his forehead and said, Teokia, one of the 4 great demons, has jumped to conclusions. Order all the demons under his control not to interfere in this matter. He leaned over and answered, Yes. At this time, Hades laughed and said, What a coward he is. Father, shouldn't he go there himself and check it out? The demoness ordered to stop talking. Hades, in public he must call him His Majesty. They are probably hiding so that even the heavens won't notice their presence. And once the deed is done, they will erase all traces of this incident. If they are attacking the Holy Knights, then they are clearly not their enemies. For now they can only observe the situation. Then he chuckled evilly and thought, but in the end, they will end up in his hands. The world of people, the lands of the Holy Church of Caramiel. They walked through the city. The 58th Pope of Caramiel, Arlaeus de Caramiel, raised his hand, and the people of the city looked at them and shouted for them to look. Saint, how beautiful she is. She held the baby in her arms, and he said, when he heard about the events in the Urals, he was so scared. If the legends are true, the Holy Maiden will definitely find her hero. Jid Kruger, the commander of the Order of the Holy Knights of Caramiel, said, The birth of an heir will bless the people. This is great news, he added, and at the same time she gave them hope in the form of the Holy Maiden. As a priest who protects humanity, as a head of state, and most importantly, as a father, he feels like a little weight has been lifted from his shoulders. Jid Kruger thought, The aristocracy does not seem to be delighted, and said, but now he thinks even they will understand that it is not the time to engage in political intrigue. After all, the birth of the Holy Maiden means that danger is approaching the world of people. They got into the carriage. She held the baby in her arms and said, True, but His Holiness should not worry. She is sure that this girl will bring them the true hero. He agreed and added that they should pray for the blessing of the goddess to be with her. Map of the worlds. The world is divided into 3 levels, heaven, the human world, and hell, connected by a world tree. Heaven, This world is inhabited by the gods, including the goddess of creation and angels. Hell, this world is inhabited by powerful demons and other evil creatures, ruled by the Demon King. The human world. There are 4 continents, east, west, north, and south, inhabited by humans and various races. Dear residents of Yorn village, this is Kakyu. The goats licked him contentedly. Later, he milked the goats and thought, it's been a month and a half since he took ours in. To get milk in the mornings, he has to milk the mountain goats brought from the village. No need to worry, ours is fine. The protagonist entered the house with cans full of milk, saw him crawling around the house and screamed, "Ars, he's running away again." He thought, this child is restless. He's only 2 months old and he's already so active? He caught him and shouted, great. He was hungry, so he should wait a bit. He put him in the carrier, started pouring milk and thought about it. But after a month and a half of fatherhood, he had already gotten the hang of making milk. Then he said, first you need to boil the water. And after the water bath, cool it down to a warm state. Done. Everything is sterilized. Handmade bottle. He picked up ours, gave him the bottle and thought, let him drink. Isn't it delicious? Well, no big deal. The taste of goat milk can change a little from day to day. Apparently his baby is just a gourmet. In that case, here it is for him. Berry jam and a little sugar will make it tastier. Wanted him to try it one more time. What's wrong? He threw up. Milk got on his clothes. The main character freaked out and sat in the corner of the room, then stood up, clenched his fists and thought, no, you can't give up like that. Then he went to the crib and said, he's dirty with milk. Now he'll change his clothes? Started changing him and shouted at him not to move like that. Honestly, he never thought that raising a child would be so difficult. He doesn't underestimate it, not by any means. But he who spent 2,000 years in hell, fought, he knew thousands of spells, he was sincerely confident that he could handle it much more gracefully. However, the reality is that he doesn't know a spell to clean diapers, nor a spell to make ours laugh. And he certainly doesn't know a spell to stop crying at night. Mothers are real heroines. Later, the child fell asleep and the protagonist folded his arms, said he was very happy, and thought, thank God. Well, sometimes raising a child seems so hard that he remembers hell, but one look at that sleeping face as all his strength returns to him. Maybe Jules and Arno feel the same way. He would like to show them this, and then fell asleep. Then an inner voice woke him up. Hey, why did he fall asleep? When ours falls asleep, it's time for housework. You need to do the laundry, chop wood, take care of the animals, work in the garden. Later, he finished weeding, wiped the sweat from his forehead with his hand and said, by the way, I completely forgot to say, he and ours moved. They moved from the Ural Kingdom to the southern continent, to the country of Elbrant, across the sea. Their new home is in the forest in the central part of this country. The reason for the move was that he killed the holy knights, and the church could start hunting for him. The lands of believers are not the place to raise a child, although he does not think that they will be able to reveal his true nature from his magic, but still, just in case. Well, since they had moved, he would like to introduce their new home, a new dwelling from an ancient, restored elven fortress. It is a dwelling carved out of the rock, once a watchtower on the road, but now that no one is left in these parts, it has been forgotten. The house fits in well with the surrounding nature. It has a beautiful view, and although it is located in a tropical forest right on the equator, thanks to the fact that the main part of the house is underground, it is always cool here. The interior, furniture, and bed he brought with him, he rebuilt everything inside with magic. The doors and chimney were added later. There was a broken well, but Kakyu equipped it with magic. This is one of the shelters he found and occupied during his travels before settling in the village of Jorn. Although the forest is quite dense, just in case, he still additionally strengthened the camouflage magic curtain, because there might be someone as perceptive as those holy knights. The house was old, of course, but in hell, the houses he built usually turned into ruins the next day. Maybe he would gradually expand it and add to it, and eventually he would have a whole castle? What a joke. Then it would not be a shelter, but a fortress. Oh well. The protagonist scratched his chin and thought, his house. He had dreamed of it for 2,000 years. He had to take care of it. Suddenly, lightning struck and hit the house straight away. The protagonist screamed, his house. Then he ran into the room and screamed, ours. Is he okay? He picked him up, lifted him up, looked at him and thought, thank God, it seems he was not hurt. He looked up and thought, but there is a hole in the ceiling. An animal? No, it's thunder. And where did it come from in such weather? Then ours began to move. The protagonist looked at him and thought, what's the matter? At that moment, ours sneezed. The protagonist thought, it seems that ours has magical abilities since birth. He was already starting to wonder why this is considered a common occurrence in this world, because in the village of Jorn, almost no one knew how to use magic. And then the only explanation comes to him. Dragon meat. He thought about it. He treated all the villagers to it, For about a year and a half, he regularly brought it to the village, and the only child born during this period with abilities was Ars. If we assume that the magical energy of the eaten dragon meat somehow affected the fetus at an early stage of development, then it turns out that Ars was born in a human body, but at the same time possesses the magical energy of a dragon. So, it is all his fault. Maybe that is why he is growing so quickly? He's burdened this child with a terrible inheritance. It is unlikely that Ars will be able to live an ordinary life in human society. Ars still needs someone other than him. The protagonist began to clone himself in a reduced size using magic, he said, creating magical creatures. These little creatures, which he calls mini Kakyu, he can control at will. In hell, where there was no place for fine work, they were useless. But with household chores, he thinks they can handle it. Life will be a little easier, and began to teach them household chores. Suddenly, he got angry, punched his jaw and thought, they can be controlled remotely. Looks like they still need more training. Oh well. He himself originally planned to raise him alone. Compared to hell, where there was constant fighting, natural disasters and chaos, raising a child alone is just a walk in the park. He raised his head up, clenched his fists and screamed, Ars, let him look at his father. He will do everything to raise him the best person. In 2 weeks. Day and night, every 2 hours feeding, changing diapers, waking up at night, running away. He only manages to calm the child down long enough to do housework, the garden, the cattle, and magic. He has to constantly patch up holes in the house. There is no time left for work or hunting. Food supplies are also running low, and on top of everything else, when he coughs, explosions, when he laughs, hurricanes, when he pees, a powerful stream of water appears, if he cries, a thunderstorm. He is not in hell, but he wants to sleep for at least an hour. The main character went to the bed and thought, hey, why is he sad? He stroked his hair with his hand and thought, this is a child, and slowly fell asleep. He had a dream. He stood by the door and asked how many times this had happened already. He raised his hand and said, this is his job, there is no choice. He continued, he likes this school and he will stay. Father asked, should I pay for the rent? He shouted that he will earn it himself. He doesn't just go on business trips, it's for his future, so that he doesn't dare decide everything himself. His father said that now he needs to study, not work. He turned around and shouted, he didn't ask for this. Then he slammed the door and looked at the altar of his dead mother. Suddenly he opened his eyes, rubbed them and asked, did he fall asleep? Then he ran into the room, defeated them, and asked in surprise, goblins? He wondered how long he slept. MC started screaming, Ars. Where is he, Ars? Then he covered his mouth with his hand and it dawned on him, not that, was he kidnapped? Then with the help of devil's eye and soul observation magic he began to look, saw the road and rushed. He was so exhausted that he didn't even notice how the goblins entered the house. He had put up a protective circle. What had he done? What kind of father is he at all? He ran and mentally asked, Ars, be okay, he's running. He ran deep into the forest, lifted a large bush and saw a family of goblins. An elf girl was holding Ars in one hand and strangling a goblin with the other. Sebas asked, who is this? The protagonist looked and thought, a dark elf and a slave? Why in such a remote place? Ars saw him and screamed, Dad. Sebas turned to MC, but he didn't understand anything. He spread his hands and said, he doesn't know the language, but still, he is a father, and this is his son. He is grateful for saving him. After the man apologized and added, he didn't know he was a foreigner. Sebas added, they were rushing to the holy city and saw the goblins who stole the baby. Oh, how glad he was that they managed to find his father so quickly. Then he turned to the girl and asked Elsa, let her give the child to the father. The main character stretched out his hands to the child and said, Ars, he apologizes, he was probably scared. But before he could finish speaking, Elsa took the child back and asked for forgiveness. Then asked, is he really the father of this child? Does he know where he is now? This is the Great Borkley Forest. Fire dragons live here, and people avoid this place, considering it an uninhabited wild forest. Far from busy roads, along an old path, one lightly dressed foreigner with a child in his arms. This looks more like a kidnapping of a child. She will ask again, is he really the father of this child? The protagonist thought about it. He tried not to think about it. Is he really suitable for Ars as his father? He does not know for sure, but he can say one thing with certainty. He apologized and added that he could not tell her the details, but for him this child was the most precious son in the whole world. She closed her eyes and apologized to him. She was impolite to ask such questions. He asked her not to say that. He was not angry with his son's benefactor. Her distrust was understandable. She said goodbye, and when he thanked her, she added that it was not necessary to thank slaves. Then he saw her enter the carriage where the cage was, the door closed, and they rode on. He stood with the child in his arms and looked after them. In fact, he guessed everything, but tried to hide it until she asked him, Ars has no one but him. Ars cannot live an ordinary life. He thought that he could raise him alone, for his sake, but he was wrong, it was for his sake. He was afraid. The more people appeared next to him, the heavier was the horror of their loss. Because he wanted to keep Ars by his side, alone. But is that how a father should act? Deprive Ars of the opportunity to find friends, love, dreams, then he will only become the same father to Ars as he had. Even if there are more dear people, he will never allow himself to lose them. He must be ready to protect them at any cost. To become a real father to Ars, to fulfill the promise made that day. He pressed him and asked, Ars, what does he think about this? He stretched out his hands to him, and the protagonist said, yes, he is right. Then he lifted him up and shouted, good. Then Dad will try his best. The child smiled widely. The protagonist added that they would find someone who would become their family. The beginning of the search for a wife and stepmother? The federal kingdom of Elfland, the southeastern part of the Great Forest, the ravine of the Heavenly Waterfall. He shouted, it worked, and finally managed to steal the dragon egg. The warrior said, incredible. Another added, not to get cocky. They will be happy when they return alive. Then he turned and asked, they are far enough away now, that dragon didn't chase them, right? Victor said not to worry. They did cast a barrier to hide magic and aura, right? The magic caster agreed. For the ritual of immersing the egg in the waterfall, 8 battle slaves and 4 S-class magical monkeys were sacrificed. Nothing, not even a fire dragon, would withstand such a force. They will compensate for these losses with the stolen egg. The magic caster reminded them not to forget that they will divide the spoils in a ratio of 3-to-1. Victor said that he will conduct all negotiations himself. They moved on and suddenly heard a sound. One asked, what is it? The other answered that he has no idea, and Victor shouted, idiot, let him hide quickly. They hid behind a log, looked out. In the distance they saw a fire dragon, and one asked, did it evaporate the waterfall? Then he roared and flew high into the sky, and one said, he's flying straight here. The second disagreed and asked, to the west? Didn't he notice them? The first added, it's all thanks to the barrier. Then he said that they were very lucky, and asked, I wonder where he could have flown to. But if they came across a city on the way, that's it, the end. He laughed and thought, why do they even care? The protagonist was walking with a child in his arms, saw a dragon in the distance, and thought, this is a real disaster. The threat level of demons and magicians, the ranks of adventurers. The lowest rank is F, and the highest is the special S. In the meantime, they entered the city. He looked around, heard an unfamiliar speech, and thought, hello everyone. This is Kakyu. He is very nervous because of the large crowd of people. This was Bamora, a port city on the Great Elbatal River, the closest settlement to their forest hideout, about 80 kilometers north as the crow flies, located near a trade route that crossed the country, with a leisurely river that was easy to sail upstream, where foreign traders conversed in many languages. But the forest on the opposite bank of the river was the domain of a fire dragon, so it was not advisable for people without business to approach, and due to such geographical conditions, this place was a breeding ground for shady trade and slave trade. So why were he and Ars in such a place? He needed a slave to look after Ars. He covered his mouth with his hand and thought, the thing is, after the recent kidnapping incident, he decided to give up the idea of raising him alone and find a spouse to help him. Wasn't this a mating hunt? In order to free up time and resources, he needed to temporarily hand over some of the child's care to someone else, since there were no daycare centers here. He looked around and thought, but why were they looking at them so askance? Was a man with a child such a rare sight? At this time, 2 men stood and looked at him. One shouted for him to look, what easy prey. The other folded his arms and added, well dressed and with a child. The protagonist heard this and it dawned on him, so that's how it happens. He also took the child with him. Then he hid behind a brick wall and thought, it turns out that going somewhere with a child is much more difficult than he thought, and, as expected, he cannot find a suitable person for this role. Slaves in this country are, as a rule, people deprived of their rights for committing crimes. Among them, it is necessary to choose someone who can be trusted with Ars and who can cope with his uncontrollable magic, a person with sufficient strength and abilities. The protagonist exhaled and thought, yes, such people are not so easy to find. Kind, strong, reliable, and educated. Her image appeared in his head. Damn it, what did he do? He missed out on an incredibly talented person. He will never meet such geniuses again. At this time, Ars reached out his hands to him and said something. The protagonist smiled, thanked him, and said, okay, Ars, what's done is done. MC tried to throw all these thoughts out of his head and thought that he needed to get ready. 2 young men were standing nearby and discussing something. One asked, really? If such a big client had arrived, there would have been more noise. The other raised his hand, disagreed, and added, he definitely heard the guys from the trading company talking about it. He looked at them and thought, they say that Sebas the Seer is in the city now. One said that since he had come specifically without an announcement, it meant that some major deal was being prepared. The other confirmed indeed this is an opportunity for their business. The protagonist thought in surprise, Sebas the Seer? Could it be Louis Sebastian? Louis Sebastian is the head of the powerful Sebastian Trading Company, dealing with everything from food to gold and slaves. In just one generation, he rose from the bottom to become one of the most influential merchants on the continent and a supplier to the Lawrence royal family. He raised his hands, smiled, and shouted happily. Even he, a small merchant from the outskirts, knows about him, although I am not sure if this is true. Good news, Ars. The little one also raised his hands and agreed. A merchant like Sebas the Seer can definitely help him find the right person. Great. Then their goal today is to find Sebas and establish contact with him. Right? An abandoned building on the opposite bank of the Elbat River, Bamora. Meanwhile, her hands and feet were shackled. She sat and thought, why then could she believe his words? After all, she thought that she would never be able to trust anyone again. Then Sebas came to her and said, Elsa, the ship is ready. She agreed and began to climb up. Meanwhile, the protagonist was running away from his pursuers. The seller was screaming at him to stop. That bastard burned down his store. The protagonist ran as fast as he could and thought he was apologizing. His child breathes fire when he sneezes. People parted and looked at him. Then he ran into a dead end, saw a wall next to him and thought, this is no luck. Several people caught up with him and one screamed, he was cornered. The second added that he should give up, they would hand him over to the police. He turned around, smiled, raised his hands and loudly told them to wait. Negotiations. He would compensate them for everything. The seller looked at him and screamed, only an idiot would believe his words. Has it been a while since he looked in the mirror? He clearly has the face of a swindler. The protagonist thought, he hasn't heard that addressed to him for a long time. Suddenly people screamed, hey, what is he doing in the city? Those who can should save themselves. To the ship. MC raised his head up and saw a fire dragon flying with its mouth open. He said in fear, oh, what? Then he pulled himself together, stretched his hand up and shouted for him to take it easy. Is he ready to take responsibility if Ars gets hurt? The dragon flew on, spewing fire from its mouth, and the protagonist thought, where did the fire dragon even come from? Although he saved him. Then he said, now we can get out of here, and remembered about his village. Then he stopped and thought, but is it worth running away? At this time, the dragon flew over the ships and spewed fire at them. Elsa stood on the ship and looked into the distance, when suddenly Sebas shouted, fire dragon! They need to turn the ship around. They're coming back. Then Elsa asked him to wait. The children didn't have time to get on the ship. Sebas looked at her in surprise and asked, what? A fire dragon? Damn, it's dangerous. Then she pushed off the ship, flew and shouted that she would help them. Sebas told her how brave she was. And the protagonist looked at the sky and thought, what should he do? If he got involved in a fight, too many people would see him. If he killed a dragon with attribute power, even the Holy Church would know about its existence. In order to save a stranger, he would have to risk Ars, become a target for the Holy Knights to pursue. If he did what was best for Ars, then he should run. That would be the right choice, right? He lowered his hands, clenched his fists, and thought that he couldn't. At that moment, everyone heard a clicking sound, raised their heads up, and the man shouted for them to look. The girls said in surprise, what? At that time, someone threw a chain with an anchor on the dragon and was climbing up this chain. Kakyu couldn't see the person. Then she threw off her cloak, and he saw Elsa swinging two swords. She rushed to attack. One sword broke on his shell. She turned around, not letting him understand what was happening. Then threw a chain on him, climbed up the chain. He pulled the chain. Elsa spun around the dragon on the chain several times and attacked him, again and again. Then she ran away from the dragon on the roofs. It was moving slower and slower after her. The protagonist looked closely, recognized her and thought, this is then. Elsa looked and thought, this fire dragon, judging by its slow movements, it is all in wounds. The work of people? Are people so stupid as to anger him and provoke him to attack the city? In any case, in an open fight she has no chance against him, but she needs to at least buy some time. She raised her hand and said Twilight. The protagonist looked closely and was surprised. Blinding magic? Elsa used body strengthening and rushed towards the dragon, waving her sword, and used blade dance magic. At that moment, the swords attacked the dragon again and again. The villagers clenched their fists, watched and shouted, she will succeed. She will defeat the dragon. Kakyu watched and thought, no, she does not leave him any damage at all. With the last of her strength, making wild cries, she attacked again and again. He carefully watched what was happening, then thought, this is bad. She is just trying to buy time for everyone to run away from here. At that moment, the dragon destroyed the brick wall with its tail, and Elsa flew down along with the rubble of the wall. She screamed, destruction. Elsa flew and screamed, no. The dragon began to release flames from its mouth. People ran away and screamed. She was beaten. They have to run. She flew past the man. He ran and exhaled, then screamed, almost touched. At that moment, the protagonist managed to catch her in his arms. She exclaimed, and he asked, does she remember him? He can't let his son's benefactor die in front of his eyes. He put her down on the ground. She was very surprised and screamed, "Him? Why? No, how?" The protagonist continued to ask her to wait, then apologized and asked, they don't have much time now, so could she quickly answer one of his questions? Can she cast a blindness spell on everyone nearby? She looked at him and answered that she could, but then asked why, and added, only for a few seconds. MC answered that it would be enough, even more than necessary. He began to get ready. She was surprised and asked him to wait. Then he gave her a child in her arms, and she asked, his child, what is he going to do? He left and said after her that he wanted to destroy the fire dragon. She stood with a child in her arms and asked, destroy the fire dragon. She put her finger to her forehead and said, twilight, veil. She didn't understand where this feeling of déjà vu came from. There's great confidence in this man's words. Does he really determine the surrounding situation using sound magic? Darkness suddenly fell. One asked what happened to his eyes. Another shouted that he could not see anything. At this time, the protagonist approached the dragon and ordered him to look at him. The dragon opened its mouth and rushed to attack. At the same second, the protagonist swung and a clot of power formed in his hand. He threw the clot straight at the target, and the dragon was torn in half and it began to fall. Later, the twilight began to disappear. The protagonist approached Elsa, who was kneeling, and asked, her name is Elsa, isn't it? He has a request for her. He knelt down, stretched out his arms to her, and asked, can she take on the role of a mother for this child? She looked at him in surprise, and at that time, people were looking at the dragon lying on the ground. A little earlier, a few months ago, the magical land of Lawrence, the depths of the royal castle. Erud looked at the picture and said, Twilight Elsa, a loyal servant of the royal court, there's a secret mission for her. She knelt down, bowed her head and agreed. The intelligence department of the kingdom of Lawrence, Twilight Elsa. He said, that night, in the former barracks of the knightly order, a secret meeting is planned between a merchant from the Dark Guild and an aristocrat. The subject of their deal will be magical artifacts, whose appearance can threaten the well-being of the people. A little later, Elsa was sitting upstairs, watching what was happening and remembering the words he said. For the prosperity of the magical kingdom, she must eliminate the merchant shortly before the deal. Right at the crime scene, Elsa prepared to attack, jumped from above and plunged her sword into him. His mouth began to bleed and he asked, for what? Elsa. She could not believe her ears. She said, it cannot be, this voice, could it really be His Majesty? A little later, she was in the courtroom, and she was sentenced. The judge said, thus, Elsa Twilight's fate is sealed, slavery for the crime committed. The guard grabbed her by the hair. She screamed for them to wait. His Highness Erud. This was his secret mission. It had to be a merchant from the Shadow Guild. He screamed at her to shut up, fool. Then he put his hand to his forehead, closed his eyes and added, His Highness was visiting the kingdom of Gareth that day, so that she would not babble nonsense. Erud Lawrence, the first prince of the magical kingdom. The judge pointed in her direction and told her to take her away. The guard began to drag her, and she begged, this is a conspiracy. If it is not exposed, the kingdom itself is in danger. So, she asked them to listen to her. Then the guard shouted for her to stop resisting. She screamed, brother, please, let him investigate. Later, she was thrown into a cell. She sat on the floor and thought, they say His Majesty fell into a coma, at least he is alive. The guard asked why that woman was not sentenced to death. Is it really true that an attempted coup d'etat does not carry the death penalty? They say they are afraid of the revenge of her secret clan. Who would buy such a criminal even if he made her a slave? And Sebastian had been given such an unpleasant task. She had been deceived. She had sworn allegiance. She had sworn it. But why had she been so disgraced in the end? What did they want to achieve by this? It was she who had tried to harm His Majesty, whom she respected as her own father, with her own hands. She thought, this is unforgivable, this is unacceptable. Suddenly she heard the jingle of keys and someone shouted, Elsa-san. A little later, they were riding in a carriage. She asked, Elvront, but this is the land of the elves, perhaps there will be a buyer there? He said that in order to avoid the posts, they would make their way through Nagraja and the old road of the Borkley forest. If they met monsters on the way, he was counting on her, Elsa. She sat behind bars and thought, but if she could atone for her guilt, she wanted to correct herself. But what would she have to do for that? She saved Ars, gave him to his father. He thanked her, and she thought, she doesn't want to be a sinner anymore. He knelt down, held out his hands to her, and asked if she could take on the role of a mother for this child. She looked at him in surprise. In the present, the kingdom of Elfland, the port of Bamora. They were kneeling in the middle of the street. He was nervous and thought, what did he just say? What kind of nonsense is he talking about? At that time, Sebas came up to them and shouted, Elsa. They turned around and she said, Lord Sebas. The protagonist added, what? Sebas. He saw them holding hands and exclaimed, oh, it's them. He apologized for disturbing them. The people were standing near the boat, and one said in surprise, And yet, when he saw the dragon's dead body, he was shocked. Did Elsa do this? She objected. No way, it's all Mr. He agreed and shouted, actually, yes. At that moment, everything around him suddenly went dark. He couldn't see anything. And then there was a terrible roar, and the dragon shattered into pieces. He didn't know exactly what happened, but maybe it was a meteorite or some other incredible natural phenomenon. She asked, Seba-sama, are the children okay? He agreed and said that she helped them. These must be illegal slaves. Real slaves must have a magical seal, which they do not have anywhere on their bodies. The children were crying. One of them asked, did the dragon leave? Another, wiping away tears, said that he wanted to go home. Elsa came to them, hugged them, and said, now everything is fine, so that they do not be afraid. Sebas wondered, they will take the children with his people to the holy city, and what will happen to Elsa? The protagonist did not know how to express himself, and added that, how to say it. Boss asked, Lord Kakyu, does he want to buy Elsa as a slave? He agreed and added, of course, but before that, he would like to clarify something with Elsa herself. He addressed her, Elsa. He, Kakyu Ruria, an average merchant from Ural, a kingdom located north of the Hoppo Sea. As he said a little earlier, he wants her to become the mother of this child, that is his wife. Watching her, he realized that he lacked what she had, and she was a person he could trust. If she agreed, then of course he would cancel all slave contracts. He did not want her to remain his slave, but wanted her to become his equal. What would she say to that? Could she help him raise this child, ours, so that he would grow up happy? She leaned over and replied that she rejected his request. She was a criminal sentenced to death for a serious crime. Freeing her from the Arab shackles would not serve as atonement for her sins. MC thought about it and said, is that so? Then he scratched his head, smiled and said loudly, what a pity. Then he asks her forgiveness for such questions, and thanks her for the answer. Elsa was surprised by his answer, and at that time Sebas pointed his hand towards the boat and said, well, he will have to tinker a little with the preparations for sailing. She shouted for him to let her help. He did not agree, thanked her, then added, it would only hinder him if she sat there in that shed, then turned to the protagonist and asked him to take care of Elsa. Sebas handed him the first aid kit and asked if he did not mind. MC agreed and said, sure. At this moment, Sebas quietly whispered in his ear that he wished him luck. The protagonist thanked him. Later, he began to bandage Elsa's wounds and asked if he could help her. She was surprised at first, and then agreed. The protagonist concentrated and thought he needed to look closely. He used the devil's eye. Strong disappointment in someone, suspicion, anger, and still remaining loyalty. It seems that her psyche is greatly disturbed. Perhaps she was betrayed by a person she trusted, but this feeling exceeds the regret and guilt she felt before. The meaning of her words goes very deep, and despite this, an ordinary person in such a situation would certainly withdraw into themselves or fall into despair. But she is completely calm. Apparently, she does not want to disturb others. Maybe this is the result of her long life as a dark elf, a manifestation of her deep love, or this. He still wants her love. He needs to get it. After he said the treatment is finished, she thanked him. He thought, okay, she can give ours, and asked if she could hold it a little longer. She agreed, looked at him and thought, it seems she is beginning to understand why she believed his words earlier. Then and now he entrusted his son to her. She felt that he trusted her. She had never had such a level of trust with anyone else. And they say that bad people always betray, that such a thing as trust no longer exists. He said, Elsa, she just said that she was unworthy of being a mother. But he does not think so. He does not care what she did. He does not know anything. But he only knows that with those very hands, defiled by sin, she saved many lives. He does not know how she feels about herself, but for him, she has been through so many trials and still, without hesitation, is ready to give her life for justice. He looked at the child, held his chin and thought it was her strength that he and ours needed so much. She bowed her head and wanted to object. He continued, for her, does weakness mean simply endlessly enduring punishment? If a person who has committed a crime worthy of death becomes a slave, then this is essentially lifelong slavery. Being a slave all your life, doing hard work, and maybe even participating in crimes, it's practically the death penalty in circumvention of the law for those countries where it is impossible to keep criminals in custody indefinitely. Types of slavery, the corresponding crime, the conditions of release, the death penalty does not exist, an ordinary crime, the expiration of the sentence. Debt, how the amount will be repaid. The protagonist asked, is this what she considers a fair punishment? She held her head with her hand, cried and screamed. She understands everything. But what does he suggest? Give up trying to atone for her guilt? Because she can't? Live happily next to him? No, she can't forgive herself, so she chooses punishment. Then she looked at him and screamed. Such a strong man like him cannot understand her feelings. At that moment, Ars woke up and started crying. She leaned over and told him to forgive her for screaming so loudly. Then Ars sneezed. Elsa told him to be healthy, started rocking him, and added that everything was fine. Protagonist looked at them with interest, and then closed his eyes and noticed. He is strong. He does not argue. Strong as a strong beast. But he cannot compare with her in caring for ours. He is a clumsy oaf. He can't even change a diaper properly. She looked at him carefully, and he continued. One day, in a moment of weakness, his son was almost kidnapped. Fortunately, they helped him. Strength and nobility are important, but they are not enough to survive. They need each other's support. Then he spread his arms out to the sides and said, he is ready to help her with atonement, if she helps him with the child. Elsa looked at him and he asked what it meant to her to atone for her guilt. He wanted to understand what reasons and conditions she believed in. She remembered and thought about the basis of justice, and then asked, is it managing an orphanage? Once the king answered, this is his payment for sins. For more than 100 years of rule, he has many times involved the people in unwanted wars, and each time there were children who lost their parents for the sake of the future of the country. He said so. He turned, looked at her, and continued, Elsa, because of her service, her hands will now serve the country, and they may get dirty, but he asked her not to forget. Her strength is for the future of their country. She cried and thought, so this is her justice, then what does she need to atone for? She will inherit the will of His Majesty. Afterwards, she wiped away her tears with her hand and said, this is what children can create with their laughter alone. He extended his hand to her and said, it's a coincidence of interests. Well, so that they could make their child laugh for a start, Elsa extended her hand in response, and he said, it's okay. He would never betray her. They stood opposite each other, holding hands, and he added, and he will definitely prove it someday. Suddenly they were in the air, and Elsa shouted for him to wait. What is going on here? The protagonist laughed and loudly explained, but what? Teleportation magic. The first time? She got angry and shouted, of course, this is her first time. No, not in that sense. Why the ultimate teleportation in the air? He apologized for it, but it's okay. He can fly. She said in surprise, and you can fly too? The protagonist pointed his hand down at the ground and shouted, in short, welcome home, his darling. A few minutes ago, on the opposite bank of Bamal. Elsa asked, proof that he won't betray her? He raised his hands to his face, agreed and said, of course it's not difficult. They use a slave contract. Arsh sat in Elsa's arms, waved his hand at the protagonist and was surprised. Sabas explained, it's a magical seal that seals the relationship between a master and a slave according to the terms of a slave contract. Then asked, is he sure about this, Kakyu? He pointed his finger up and continued, if the master wants to fulfill any of the conditions set out in the contract, use the seal to bind the slave's body and deprive him of his freedom. Is he really sure he wants to become a slave? The protagonist smiled, agreed and shouted, of course. Elsa looked at him in surprise and asked, she didn't quite understand what this all meant. MC came closer to her, looked into her eyes and explained loudly, well, in short, they would become each other's master and slave at the same time. They would call it a mutual slavery contract. She said in surprise, what? He continued, so surely neither of them would be able to betray the other, right? Mr. Sebas smirked and said, what an interesting turn of events. They are now both master and slave at the same time? It's just like a real marriage, huh, Kakyu? She asked, is he sure? He answered that she should stop thinking negatively about this proposal. He definitely isn't trying to set her up. Then he waved his hand and asked, Mr. Sebas? He brought 2 needles. They pricked their thumbs at the same time. He spread his arms out and shouted, then let them apply blood seals to each other's bodies. They put their thumbs on their bodies as instructed. Currently, the great forest of Borkley, Kakyu's base. They were walking down the road, she said here. He explained. He had remodeled an old abandoned fortress. He thought it would be a perfect place for a hideout. She thought, a hideout. The protagonist walked on, went into the house, then turned around and yelled at her to come here. Elsa agreed, went into the house and looked around. He scratched his head and apologized for all the mess. They went on a tour of the house, and he explained the part that gave off that dark magical glow, that's where he kept the bones and skins of elemental dragons and other strong monsters. Selling everything at once would definitely attract attention, so he just kept them here. Overall, the conditions here were pretty safe. It's harmless, she shouldn't worry. Then looked at him and thought, no, seriously, who the hell is this guy? And at that time, he walked up to the crib, picked up the child and said, they're back, ours. As if it was nothing special. He easily defeats elemental dragons, uses teleportation and levitation without uttering a single word of incantation. Only a legendary hero or a powerful demonic general could do that. And yet he calls himself just an average merchant from the north? She can't believe that he seriously thinks that, and he looks like some kind of swindler. What a disappointment. But she remembered his words. He will help her atone for her guilt, and she will help him with raising the child. At that moment, he raised his finger up and said that they should calmly discuss the terms of their agreement once again. His terms for her is to become a mother for Ars. She closed her eyes and added, Her terms for him, her husband, is to help her atone for her guilt. He asked, atonement means helping children left without parents, right? She agreed and added, so she will try her best to be a good mother from the very beginning. Then Ars raised his hands and shouted, okay, he will quickly take care of the garden and animals, he will be free before sunset, and she should sort out the whole house in the meantime. She agreed and began to clean. Later she stopped and thought, a clay doll? He can even control them? Impressive. What is he hiding from? Such a strong person, what does he need to hide from? Or maybe he is planning something. She looked out the window and thought, no, enough! She also has a dark past that she does not want to remember. He saved her life, and even decided to become her slave in order to win her trust. She understands that deep down she trusts him. Her current worries come from a completely different source. Is she really worthy of being a mother? She said, for her, a mother is. At that moment, the door opened. The protagonist walked in, exhaled and said, was it good that I made it before sunset or not? He looked down and saw Elsa lying on the floor. Her earliest memory was of training with her brother. The people of her village considered martial skill their duty, and both men and capable women underwent rigorous combat training. According to the customs of her village, men and women were completely separated during military training. Under the watchful eye of her strict father, the village chief, she strove to excel, competing with her talented older brother and other students. In her little world, she had no mother, not at all. In the meantime, he carried her to the bed, put in an IV, sat down on a chair next to the bed and fell asleep. Suddenly, through his sleep, he heard her ask, husband? He looked at her in surprise, then cried and said how happy he was. She looked at him, didn't understand and asked, so how long had she slept? He answered, about 2.5 days. It's good that she woke up at least. Elsa tried to get up and said, 2 whole days, she had a lot of things to do. He held her with his hands and told her to wait. She still had a fever. She hadn't gotten out of bed for 2 days. She shouldn't get up so abruptly. She lay back down and apologized. The protagonist took a wet towel, started to wring it out and said, no, with such wounds it would have been inevitable. Moreover, it was his fault that he didn't allow her to rest after the battle with the fire dragon. He apologized and added, if only he could heal with magic. She asked, husband, you mean magic that he can't use? Kaku put a wet towel on her head and said, obviously, yes, of course, not all magic is under his control. Then he remembered, it's milk time. Handed it to her and said he'd be in the barn if she needed anything, to call the doll and he'd come. She asked, the doll? Then she reached out and took it. The protagonist explained, a portable mini Kaku. It had magic embedded in it that allowed her to communicate with its owner, even if they were far apart. She said that was convenient. He snapped his fingers and shouted, and also, hot vegetable soup that he'd made especially for her so she could eat it as soon as she woke up. Thanks to the state preservation spell, it was as fresh and warm as if it had just been cooked. And why on earth couldn't they just make medicine? Then he opened the door and said, also, she was probably hungry, but you shouldn't pounce on food when you're really hungry. It's bad for your body, so she should eat slowly, washing it down with water. Okay, he's off. She watched him go, pleased. Then she heard the baby crying and thought, that's it, she's coming, ours. Stop crying, his milk will be ready soon. All this time he was looking after her, while also looking after the baby. Thanks to him, she briefly immersed herself in memories of her mother. It was during one of her training sessions. She was hurt so badly that she was bedridden. Just like now, she woke up and saw her mother sitting next to her and taking care of her. She doesn't remember the details of their conversation, but it seems to her that she wanted to apologize. Probably during that period she often argued with her father and even disobeyed him. And there was a bruise on her cheek. Maybe he hit her for no reason. Perhaps happiness lies in simple conversations and simple time spent together. It doesn't matter whether she feels guilty before the child or is an incomprehensible creature. The main thing is to sincerely, from the bottom of your heart, be a good parent, and the child will definitely feel it. She lay on the bed and said, then she will try too. Then she got up, removed the IV, ate and said, delicious. After some time, Elsa came out and greeted the main character again. He was holding the child on his shoulder, turned around and asked, is she feeling better? At that moment, Ars crawled away from him, and he ran to catch up and shouted for him to stop. She looked around and thought, took a closer look and realized that the cleanliness she had done had been blown away. What a pity. The protagonist ran and shouted for him to stop and wait, asking him to put on a diaper. Ars activated his powers and there was a loud explosion. The protagonist sighed and said, another hole in the wall. She asked in surprise, what? They are the strangest father and son she knows. What a difficult path this family will have. A little later, the protagonist was sitting at the table, raising his hands to his chin and looking at Ars, who was in bed. Elsa came up and said, well, let's start their first family meeting right now, he said thoughtfully. So, the topic of discussion. The unexpected explosion of their son's magic spell, she didn't notice how she cleaned all night, then went into the house, went to the bed and shook him by the shoulders and said, "Husband, it's already morning. It's time for him to clean the barn, right?" He continued to sleep. Meanwhile, she tugged at the sheet and dropped him off the bed. Only 2 days had passed since Elsa's recovery, but life in their house had changed dramatically. Thanks to the division of household chores, he had more free time. Thanks to this, he can devote more time to training and is already perfecting the control of the mini Kakyu. Now he can control up to 2 bodies. He raised his hand to his chin and thought, what a clever girl he found. She's a jack of all trades. Suddenly she called him and said, she came for goat's milk only. Ars was lying in bed, smiling and reaching out his hands to them. But there was one thing. The protagonist picked him up, began to feed him milk and shouted, "Here, Ars, his milk." The child was crying and did not want to eat. At that time, Elsa picked him up and said, "Let him try this. It should be tastier." Ars tried it and began to eat with pleasure. The protagonist looked at them and thought, somehow strange, Ars seemed to be more attached to Elsa than to him. Elsa said, "Well, then they should have breakfast." The protagonist interrupted her, did not agree and said, "He will prepare breakfast. He will not allow him to be closer to her than to him. He will prove that he can be useful too." She came up and saw a steak from a fanged boar, folded her arms on her chest and thanked the goddess for this gift. Then she tried it and exclaimed that it was delicious. He tried it and thought, of course it was delicious. After all, he suffered for so many years, trying to make at least something edible from these hellishly disgusting ingredients, however, without success. After all, this is the fruit of his 1,000-year-old labors. What? Tasteless. And how sweet? No way. Did he confuse sugar with salt? Is he really that stupid? Is he the main character of some manga? But Elsa said it was delicious. She bowed her head, apologized and added, "Every family has its own taste, passed down from generation to generation." She didn't know about it at all, was thinking about getting up to the stove and thanked him. He closed his eyes and thought, she was too perfect. Does he even have a chance? She took the plates from the table and asked, "Husband, what are his plans today?" The main character remembered and cried out, "Oh, today he wanted to try a spell to catch insects in the garden." At that moment, the child started crying, and the main character turned to Elsa and said that he would do it himself. He picked him up and asked, "What happened? Did he poop? Or maybe pee?" He smiled and said, full of energy, "They're ours." Meanwhile, he was making happy sounds in his arms. She said, "Husband, let's call a family council." And yet she thinks that something is wrong. He thought about it and answered. He told her that the origin of Ars is a little special. Elsa did not agree and added, she did not think so. When he, the husband, takes care of him, only then will he be able to use magic. He asked thoughtfully, "That is?" She looked at him and asked, "Maybe the cause of the explosion lies in the master?" The protagonist grabbed his head and screamed something. She continued, "Maybe they were wrong, thinking that it was an explosion. In fact, the boy perhaps acted consciously. For example, when the master uses magic in front of the boy to please him, he does not scold him, but laughs. Perhaps the boy realized that by using magic, he can please the master." Tears appeared in his eyes, and he thoughtfully asked, "Does that mean that he created half of these problems for himself?" She agreed. Then he lay down, wrapped himself in a blanket, and said that he was a terrible parent. He wanted to turn into a cocoon and disappear. Then he added that she should step on him and crush him. The bug. Elsa, with Ars in her arms, leaned over to him and told him not to worry. Husband, since they had found the reason, they could fix everything. They had to try together. If he tried to be a good father, their child would definitely feel it. Sir. Thanks to him, she realized her mistake. He got angry and thought, what nonsense. She had just recently said that she had no qualities at all inherent in a good mother. Yes, she copes with the role of a parent 100 times better than him, and who is he then? Nobody. Trash. Then she said, "Husband, it seems to her that their baby just wants to please him. Maybe he does it a little strangely, but he loves him very much." She raised Ars higher and asked, "He just wants to please his dad, right, Ars?" He asked, "Yes." He agreed, and added, of course, Ars." Suddenly, he jumped out of the blanket, stretched out his hand and screamed, "Ars!" Little Ars was scared and pressed himself against Elsa. At this time, the protagonist seemed to evaporate. Several days passed, and, strangely enough, Elsa's prediction turned out to be correct. After the changes made to his upbringing, Ars completely stopped showing uncontrollable outbursts of magic. At this time, the protagonist was working in the field. He stood and thought, does this house even need him? Suddenly, he shook his head and thought, fool, what is he even thinking about? He copes well with animals and work in the field, thanks to the fact that he lived in the village of Jorn. If the wheat grows, then they will have something to eat, and if they sell it, then there will be money. Everything will be fine. This family needs him. After some time, a heavy rain fell. His wheat field, he was kneeling and screaming, destroyed. She folded her arms, got angry and asked, seriously? This is wheat, right? Nothing will grow here. Everyone eats potatoes and rice here because of the weather. Nothing like that grows here. The main character looked at the ground, cried and thought, what the hell did he do? Everything is going wrong for him, and ours does nothing but stick to Elsa. Then bloody tears flowed down his face, and he repeated, ours does nothing but stick to Elsa. He jealously screamed, what the hell? Then he grabbed his head and started shaking it, thinking that he should cool down. Fool, he is so ancient. Has he forgotten why he got involved with this elf? He has his own task. After some time, he pulled himself together, got ready, called her, and said that he was going away for a few days. She asked, where is that? He replied that due to the destruction of the harvest in the fields of the Holy City's Merchant Guild, the state is experiencing an acute shortage of funds. He intends to open his own business, conduct a thorough market analysis, and find reliable buyers for their products. He can't tolerate failures like this anymore. Astraga, the holy city of the United Kingdom of Elbrant. He said he has a certificate from the Northern Guild, a bill of exchange, and a letter of recommendation from the great merchant Sebastian, real ones. The workers asked him to let them see. He scratched his head and asked, will they register him like that? They answered, of course. He looked and thought that the check would take at least a week. But, as they say, it is useful to have good connections. Then he remembered the conversation with Sebas. He asked if he could have a letter of recommendation. Sebas answered, okay, and only asked why. Later, he was in the building, looked at the people and thought, having asked for help, he decided that it was time to make new acquaintances. Then the merchant of the country of Lorenz Luran said, he was in complete despair. In this country during the rainy season, the Elbat River often floods in the lower reaches, which makes the ferry roads unusable. The merchant of the country of Lorenz Sharon moved her hand to the side and added, therefore they, the Lorenz merchants, use a bypass route through the forest, crossing by boat from the upper reaches of the Bomola River. And at this time the protagonist was in the room, sitting with the girls at the table, and one girl asked him, he probably heard about the recent appearance of a dragon in the vicinity of Pomora. Another said that its death was the cause of fierce clashes between the dark guilds. She added, and some idiots won. And their commander is called Vitra, and the road is almost blocked, and on the road that remains, monsters roam in droves. The protagonist asked, what about exterminating them? She folded her arms across her chest and replied, yes, during the rains, when the water creatures crawl out on land, all the nights are busy, nothing can be done. He asked again, what about by sea? She got angry and screamed, impossible, no money. He covered his mouth with his hands and looked at her in surprise. The next day, he brought the dragon's paws to the merchants. Shuren screamed in shock and Luran agreed and added that these were definitely monster paws. She came up to him, grabbed him by the jacket, started shaking and asked, does he seriously think that she will believe that he killed it himself? Is he kidding? It is impossible for him to do this in one day, that he dare not deceive her. He will not succeed, the swindler. He spread his arms to the sides and said that he has mercenary friends. He asked them for help even before coming here, and today, they were supposed to bring the trophy. She looked at him with displeasure and asked, was he pretending to be stupid all this time? He concluded, as he said, that these were the paws of monsters. The protagonist smiled and thought, well, of course he has no connections and he killed him himself. But this is just a lie to make it easier. And probably because of this, Luran held his forehead with his hand and asked, why didn't he tell them everything right away? Did he want them to pay him for it? Shuren held her chin with her hand and added that he shouldn't count on it. They didn't have money. He thought, well, that's great. Then he stretched out his hand and said, then in exchange, tell them about the market prices of their goods and trade routes, and maybe introduce him to their suppliers. What will they say? Later, he was sitting on the bed and talking on Mini Elsa. He said, anyway, there's this thing. Some brother and sister are trading salt, and tomorrow they will introduce him to the boss of the Chiron merchant fleet. He heard in response, such success in just 2 days. She congratulates him, husband. On the table stood Mini Elsa. It's like a phone, but in the form of a doll. He closed his eyes and laughed. Well, tomorrow everything will become clear. Then he thought that she would praise him. He is not such a slacker. The protagonist continued, tomorrow he will have a very busy day, so he will probably not be able to answer the phone. That's what he wanted to tell her. She answered, I see then, her husband, she wishes him luck from the goddess. MC and added, yeah, and Elsa, he asked her to say hello to Ars from him. He was lying down, looking at the ceiling and shouted to wait for him. Ars, he will show him how cool his father is. The next day, the brother and sister introduced him to Silga, a sea merchant from Elbrant. The protagonist and Silga shook hands to introduce themselves, and the brother and sister clapped their hands. He shouted, great, he is ready to give priority to all trade to them. Let's make a deal. After they sat at the table, negotiating, Silga raised his hand and said he was especially interested in his connection with the mercenaries, Kakyu. This is very important, especially during the rainy season when the safety of transportation is highly questionable. The protagonist replied that he was flattered and suggested getting straight to the point. He smiled and continued. These goods are the salt he sells, and all sorts of materials, meat from monsters. He will show everything now. At that moment, Mini Elsa rang. Silga asked what was there. He answered, nothing. The protagonist got very angry, pressed the doll and thought. He said that he would not be able to answer the phone today. He asked, is everything okay? The protagonist waved his hand, agreed, and added that they need to continue the negotiations. He thought, and as it is, everything is falling out of his hands at home, nothing works out. So at least at work he should have a grand success. At the end of the negotiations, they shook hands, and he said, well, what a day. Thanked him for a pleasant time. The protagonist added, we need to get together again sometime and have a drink. Shuren joked, he is a weakling. He doesn't know how to drink alcohol, he drinks it like water, and Silga laughed. Later, he barely made it home, fell headfirst on the bed and exhaled. Then he lay down more comfortably and thought, today he hit the jackpot. Now when he gets home, he will definitely be showered with compliments. At that moment, the phone rang. He picked it up and thought, by the way, today the phone was just blowing up with notifications. Did something happen? He will ask her about this when he tells her about the results. Then he heard a voice. She screamed, husband trouble. They are in trouble. It concerns ours. At that very second, he ran outside and ran home in the pouring rain. After a while, he opened the door to the house and excitedly said, what happened to ours? He went to the bed where ours was lying. The protagonist asked, what is this terrible fever? She screamed, husband. Since lunchtime, his temperature has been rising, and recently it has become simply unbearable, as if he is burning. MC covered his mouth with his hand and thought, the daytime message was exactly about this. Then he asked the reason. Elsa leaned over the crib, raised her head, looked at the main character, and said that she does not understand anything, neither the rash nor the breathing problems. She has never seen the temperature rise so high and for no reason. He thought, if the reason is unknown, then there is no medicine. What to do? If it is because of his dragon nature, then if only he had healing magic. And in general, is it possible to cure it with magic? Elsa began to shake him and shouted, husband. She will go now to collect all the healing herbs she can find. He was surprised and shouted, the middle of the night in such a downpour? It is dangerous. He will go himself. She answered, husband. He does not know much about the local vegetation. Does he? She sees better in the dark, and her husband should be with their son. Then she opened the door, went out, and finally said that she was leaving. The door slammed shut, and he, unfortunately, thought that he was completely useless. At that moment, Ars woke up, said something, and began to stretch out his hands to him. He leaned over the bed and asked, was he encouraging him? Such a worthless father. He could do nothing for him. And he began to ask for his forgiveness. Suddenly, the door opened. Elsa stood on the threshold, holding a large tree in her hands. He stretched out his hand to her and asked, Elsa, isn't it early? What about the herbs? She went into the house and answered, she was going to, but at the entrance to the forest she saw this and remembered. This is the devil's walking stick, one of the types of magical trees that grow quickly, consuming a huge amount of mana. Then they grabbed the child's arms and legs with the branches of the tree, and at the same moment it began to grow upward, and fruits began to appear. Elsa looked up and said, it was as she thought. He looked at her and asked, what was she talking about? She replied, as a child she learned from the village elder that elves and other races with strong magic sometimes had this. Their magic power grew faster than their body, and this could lead to instability. He asked in surprise, was this really a magical breakdown? She agreed and added, but since the demon host had absorbed some of the magic, the temperature should drop soon. The protagonist knelt down, exhaled, and then thanked her. He was again focused on himself and did not notice anything around him. He made a contract with Elsa because he knew he couldn't do it alone, but then he became jealous, which is why he ruined everything. He tried to make up for lost work, but in the end he completely forgot about Ars. Here she interrupted him and said, husband, ever since he left home, the baby cried at night, and it was impossible to cope with him, especially when he had a fever. For him, he is the most reliable and irreplaceable person. Elsa raised her hand up, added, and now for her too. He shed tears and thanked her. Probably the magical breakdown was accelerated because they suppressed that magical explosion, but sooner or later, it had to happen. In the future, they will regularly use the devil's walking stick to draw out excess magic from him. She said, husband at work and she at home, so that they divide the responsibilities and start acting together, each in their own area of competence, and so that they do not hide their thoughts, but openly express their opinions. Later, she carried the plates to the table and said loudly, so today she cooked breakfast and offered him to eat. He looked at the plate and thought, does she want to poison him? Sautéed goat and bear paws with wild mushroom sauce. He picked up the cutlery and thought, everything will be fine. This is Elsa. No matter how it looks, the taste must be excellent. He wished everyone a bon appetit. He ate a little and then fell face down into the plate. She smiled and said that her cooking was, of course, good, but not so good that he could dive into it like into a swimming pool. He thought, Is he dying? Then he decided that he would be the one cooking from now on. A little earlier, Sebas asked in surprise, what does it mean that he wants to become a slave? The protagonist extended his hand forward and said, that's true, but there are some reasons. Sebas spread his hands and replied, well, without good reason it would be illegal. The protagonist smiled and shouted, I understand, so that they do everything beautifully. He wants to buy Elsa, but he doesn't have this country's money, so he will borrow from you and become his debtor. Sebas said in surprise, but the currency of the Ural kingdom is also suitable. He continued, and then when Elsa becomes his slave, she can buy herself out. She was in shock, she had no money. He opened the bag and said, everything has already been thought out so that she doesn't worry, Elsa. A magic bag, a magic storage item with a large space inside, expanded by magic. At this moment, the protagonist shook everything out of the bag and said, here, he has plenty of materials from magical beasts. She could take it. She thought, he is contradicting himself. If someone reveals this scheme, it will be hard. Sebas walked up to it and shouted, great, this amount should be enough. Protagonist stood behind and said, he has connections with good mercenaries. To be precise, he lied. She asked him to tell her why he would do such a roundabout thing. Is it to become equal to her? He looked at her and said with a smile that he thought this was the best way to show that he trusted her. She looked at him, then got angry and thought, what was wrong with this man? At this time, the protagonist handed over Sebas's bag. He thought, is this an illegal bag? It seems like he is using illegal things. Sometime later, Elsa looked at him and said seriously, she wanted to say a few words to her husband today. He turned around, holding Ars, looked at her and was surprised. Then he asked, teleportation? She answered, right, why does he teleport in the air every day? The protagonist apologized. If you don't set the exact coordinates with the portal when teleporting, you can end up anywhere, such as underground or in the water, so in order to avoid accidents, he teleports to the sky. She asked, so if you don't set the exact coordinates when teleporting, he just needs to set the right ones? Why hasn't he set them yet? He replied, well, he had no time for that. She told him to solve this issue as soon as possible. He said okay, and yes, he quickly sorted out this problem. In a dream, the protagonist and Arno were sitting at a table in the bar. He said that when you realize that it is he who is responsible for a little person, you begin to feel such a surge of strength and love. Upbringing is a mutual process in which parents and children learn and develop. The protagonist raised his glass and said that when you live for someone, especially for a child, you feel truly alive. It is as if you find your purpose, your goal. At such moments, he understands that life takes on a special meaning. He answered, well, great. He's become just like a real father. Jules served him a drink and said that all that's left is to show off the image of the perfect husband. He took the glass and said, but he is already making maximum efforts. He asked, did he kiss her? He did not agree and added, because with Elsa they are connected exclusively by a contract. He laughed and asked, man, is he serious? Jules said that if Alma knew about this, she would be deeply disappointed. He should get his thoughts together. Arno held out his hand and told him not to tell him that he is not attracted to Elsa at all. He said, that's not true. It's just that he is a demon, not a human, and not even an elf. He looked him in the eyes and said, he gets it. He just has never kissed in his life. The protagonist looked away, smirked and answered, kissed, actually. He said in his ear, in that case, bro, he should help him out. The protagonist told him to stop. He is scared. Wait, Arno, stop. Arno closed his eyes and wanted to kiss. The protagonist suddenly jumped up, told him to stop, and they hit their foreheads with Elsa, who leaned over to wake him up. He grabbed his head and asked, Elsa? What now? She raised her hand to her chin and answered, it's just morning already, and she came to wake him up. July 1014 of the sacred calendar, the kingdom of Effland, the great forest of Borkley. Ars grew up quickly. One day, when the protagonist was messing around with a goat, suddenly Ars appeared from around the corner, extended his hand forward and asked, who is this? The protagonist grinned and asked, is he alone here again? Ars? Mom will scold him. He picked him up and said, this is a kid, born this morning. Cute, right? He is his older brother Ars, so be kind to him. Ars smiled and asked, brother? The protagonist smiled, agreed and added, he is a brother. Later they had a party. His birthday. They put a cake in the middle and he blew out the candle. And you know, today is exactly 1 year since the day he became a part of their family. He doesn't know when he was born, so he considers his birthday to be the day he found him. The protagonist looked at the child, said loudly, and today Mom and Dad prepared gifts for him. He held a book in his hands, smiled and said, a large encyclopedia of magical creatures with pictures, a bilingual guide and a historical reference book. At this time, he turned to Elsa and asked, isn't it too early? He's only a year old? She answered, nothing of the sort. In her village, they start teaching children from the moment they start walking. It's a real Spartan school. He asked, by the way, at what age do dark elves start walking? Compared to people? She answered, race and age have nothing to do with it. The main thing is what Ars is interested in. No need to make him into a lazy person like him. He got angry and shouted, He also studied a lot and now speaks Rurian well. Elsa is too strict, he doesn't know how it was in her homeland, but she didn't agree and shouted, he indulges him too much. Shoes, clothes scattered everywhere, and money that hasn't been put away. That's too much. He asked, what does this have to do with it now? Ars shouted to them, with tears in his eyes, that fighting is bad. They looked at him, closed their eyes and thought how cute he was. He said, everything is fine. They don't argue. The baby asked, really? He answered, really, really. The main character and the baby began to look at the pictures in the book, and Elsa apologized and added, she was a little unrestrained. She should have tried before judging. The main character didn't agree and added that he was wrong. He didn't know what would make the child happy. He said too much. The next day, they went to the forest. Ars ran with a net and caught insects with it. She asked, is he catching insects? Is he going to eat them? The protagonist asked why she thought so. It was just a game. Ars had seen some creatures in the encyclopedia and wanted to catch them, although they were unlikely to live in their area. She replied, oh well. They walked further through the forest, and the protagonist told him not to go too far. She remarked, oh, the boy took after his father. He remarked, well, yes, that happens. He probably caught insects when he was little, although he no longer remembers. She said thoughtfully, she would like to see her husband's childhood. Then he remembered the question, have they kissed yet? At that moment, something hit her on the head. She turned and asked, a bat? Then they leaned towards each other, but immediately moved their heads in different directions. Ars appeared from behind, pointed forward with his hand and shouted, Bobo? They asked again, Bobo? They walked a little and saw a small dragon lying in the grass. The protagonist screamed in surprise. It's a fire dragon. She screamed in horror, a baby? Ars pointed his finger at the dragon and said, here. She screamed for him not to come close. The protagonist raised his hand to his chin and asked, where did the dragon come from? Then she picked up Ars in her arms, and he roared and screamed, it's his brother. She forbade him to come closer, and MC remembered how he himself had recently told him, yes, Ars, you are his brother. The child did not listen, went up to the dragon and hugged him around the neck. She screamed, hey Ars. The protagonist said, Mommy Elsa, he's still so little. She barked, what is he talking about? What if he gets bitten and gets sick? What if his parents are nearby? Has he already forgotten what happened in Bamor? The dragon and the child came up and looked at Elsa. She folded her arms across her chest and looked back menacingly. At that moment, the dragon turned around and flew away. Ars cried loudly, and the protagonist tried to calm him down. That day, Ars cried until the evening, until he got tired. And the next day, he often looked anxiously towards the forest. She watched the child and called him. At that moment, the protagonist ran past and screamed, oh my god, he overslept. She asked him what he was making noise about this morning. He quickly began to pack his things and answered, there was a big auction at sea today. He didn't know exactly when the auction for the lot he wanted would start, so he had to hurry, otherwise he would be late. He began to put on his gloves, and suddenly it came apart at the seam. He screamed, the gloves that Alma had given him. The protagonist walked back and forth and thought, well, what else did he expect from the fact that he wears them every day? What should he do? He can't drive with torn gloves, and as luck would have it, there was no time at all. She asked what's wrong with him. Then he hung them on a candlestick and thought, okay, he'll leave them here, come home. He'll fix them right away. Then he ran to the exit, apologized and added that when he came back, he would definitely clean everything, honestly. He told her not to touch anything and said goodbye. She looked at the scattered things on the couch and asked, did he say to leave it as is? Then she noticed how Ars picked it up and told him not to put the nasty stuff in his mouth. She closed her eyes and thought that she couldn't ignore all this while the child was around. She kept asking him to clean, but he still wouldn't. Then she looked at the candlestick and thought, are these the gloves that her husband takes such good care of? They broke. That's why he was so upset. Then she took it in her hand and laughed and asked, maybe she should teach him a little lesson? Sometime later, in the auction house of the trading city of Balmor, the man, holding the chain that was chained to the girl, raised his hand and shouted, 300, 320, 350, 4,000. Who will give more? Shuren waved her hand at the protagonist and said, this way. Smiling, he looked around and said, there are a lot of suspicious types here. She said with a smile, since Vitra became the boss, everything has become exactly like this, and all his slaves are also illegal. At that moment, one of the people present said, it seems like a reward has been put on the head of the guild leader. Then Silga asked, isn't it time for them, the mercenaries, to prove themselves? Kakyu. Doesn't he notice him or something? He said, hey, Kakyu? The people present behind him began to talk. They say that a certain adventurer is assisted by a whole bunch of incredibly strong mercenaries. They say that he works much faster than the average person or adventurer, and yet no one has ever seen him with their own eyes. The protagonist thought as if some non-existent mercenary is becoming more and more famous. Shuren laughed and said enthusiastically, there are such rumors about him. Lauren added, that's great. Let's make good use of it. Then the host raised his index finger and said, "The next lot is 20-year-old Drash wine from the Sankarami kingdom. The starting bid is 20,000. Shouts were heard in the hall. 23,000, 25,000, 30,000. The protagonist raised his hand and shouted, 200,000. After a while, he asked, did he really buy it for 10 times the price? Did he want this wine so much? The protagonist put his hand on the pig's box and confirmed it. Their wedding anniversary would be coming soon. His wife is a very loyal follower of the goddess cult, and she often says that she wants to visit the sacred city of this cult. Since traveling there was not yet possible, he wanted to bring her a little closer to that place by giving her wine from that kingdom. Shuren took the food in her hands, smiled and clarified, "It turns out he is quite a caring husband?" Lauren, reaching into his inside pocket, said, "Well, such a caring husband needs a good gift." He held out the bag and added, although this is not enough to fully thank him for everything he does for him, but he still hopes for their further cooperation. After that, the protagonist took the bag in his hand and looked at it. After some time, he sat on the edge of the pier, looked at the glowing stone in the ring. He asked, "What kind of nonsense is this? Some kind of trinket? Is there really nothing better?" He thought that this should suit her perfectly. No, over this year he became attached to her, or rather fell in love, but the fact is that he is a demon. In his essence, he is radically different from ordinary creatures. His breathing is, again, his spiritual essence, and his body is just a clot of magical energy. Demons can't leave behind offspring. They make a contract with the souls of the dead and turn them into demons, thus increasing their ranks. They did the same to him, making a contract in hell. Therefore, he, like other demons, has no reproductive instinct, no ability to reproduce. But the feelings he has for Elsa are human feelings. Maybe it's just an illusion, memories of the time when he was a human. Does he have the right to give her this ring or not? Memories flashed through his mind. He thought, this is another story. Everything is different now. Meanwhile, Ars was looking out the window, watching the rain. He turned around and said, "It's raining, Mom." She stroked his head and told him not to worry. Dad has teleportation magic, so the rain doesn't bother him. After a while, he went home and said that he was home. Elsa said, "Welcome back." And then he looked back and asked where his suitcase and gloves were. She closed her eyes and said that it was torn, so she considered it unnecessary and threw it away. She thought, she hoped that she said it naturally. She hid it carefully and even sewed it up. She knows her husband well, he will notice everything at once. But she hopes that this will be a lesson for him. He grabbed her by the shoulders and screamed. What was she doing? He said to leave it where it was and not to touch it. Elsa could not find the words to justify herself. The main character continued to scream. She knew how much he valued those gloves. He asked how she could do such a thing. She lowered her head and answered, of course, she knew that they were dear to him. He got even angrier and screamed, does that mean she betrayed his trust and threw them away anyway? She screamed back, if things were really important to him, he would not have thrown them everywhere. And then, in such a state, a broken thing is no different from trash. Ars watched them with tears in his eyes. He asked, what kind of nonsense is this? Some customs of her homeland again? Do dark elves have a tradition according to which broken things must be given as a sacrifice to the goddess without hesitation? At that moment, she hit him on the cheek. He took the blow silently and she turned and walked away. Ars came up to him and he, stroking his head, apologized and said that he needed to be alone. He went to look for gloves. After some time, the main character was sitting on the couch and drinking wine. How many hours he spent searching, and all to no avail. It can't be that she threw them away. Elsa would never do such a thing. How could she not know that they were so dear to him? He did not let her finish what she wanted to say. The protagonist poured more wine, drank it, raised his hands to his head and cried, apologized. Alma, he couldn't protect her last gift. At that moment, Elsa knocked on the door, opened the door and asked, husband, has he seen Ars? He immediately tensed up and asked, what? They immediately ran out into the street where it was raining. She asked, is he sure that Ars went in this direction? He agreed and thought, because of the rain the tracks are hard to see, but he sees the remains of the soul clearly. She said that it was her own fault for hitting him. He replied that it was his own fault and that she should forgive him for allowing himself to insult her homeland. They approached a large tree, she said. Everything is fine. They are from different people. But before she could finish, the protagonist stretched out his hand forward and raised the other to his mouth. There was a hollow in the tree. They looked in and saw Ars sleeping in an embrace with a baby fire dragon. She asked, is that a baby fire dragon? He was surprised and asked, did Ars come to help him? Will they scold him for this? She answered, no way, told him to look at how cute they are sleeping. Then she called him and handed him the gloves. He was surprised and asked, did she still not throw them away? She agreed. He continued and even sewed them up? She agreed again. He looked at her and asked, then why did she lie to him? She was silent for a while and said, she just probably wanted her husband to worry a little. Since they had been living together, she had seen his sloppy side and weaknesses, but she could not imagine that he would be seriously angry. Sometimes, it was as if he penetrated into the very depths of her soul, understood her better than she did herself. She was sure that he would never say anything that could hurt her, and therefore she relaxed too much, and therefore was so surprised that she hit him. He thought it was his fault for using the devil's soul eye too often. Then she knelt down and shouted. She was really so sorry. He waved his hands and shouted. She was forgiven, so she got up. He could not justify her trust. Actually, initially it was all because he did not clean it up himself. Elsa said that she was glad that he realized his mistake. She simply idealized him too much, admired his detachment from worldly affairs. He asked, idealized? She smiled and continued. So perhaps she did not act quite as she should have. He answered, she was also a person. There were people who once made him a person, but he ran away from the realization of this fact and forever missed his chance. Now everything is different. Even if this feeling is a deception, he does not want to run away anymore. The protagonist got down on one knee, opened the box and said, Elsa-san. No, Elsa. Then he took her hand and continued, not because of the contract, but in a real sense. Will she marry him for real? She smiled and agreed, added with pleasure. Then he put the ring on her finger. A temporary union is just a page in the life story of true love. Late at night, when they came home and carefully brought Ars and the dragon, who were sleeping peacefully near the fireplace, the protagonist sat on the couch, raised his hands behind his head and said, Ars is not his real son. He is the son of his dead best friend. And after his death, he ran away so far, all because on the way he got too carried away by a fight with bandits and decided to play it safe. She was also sitting on the couch, turned to him and asked him to tell how he learned to wield magic so well. He joked that he did not know. He had amnesia. Yes, that was what he intended. After the proposal, he told Elsa everything that had happened to him, except for his true identity as a demon due to the other world, and the fact that the bandits who attacked the village and Jorn were the holy knights of the kingdom. But then he asked, the assassination attempt on the king? Elsa also shared her past with him, about the time she was a scout, about her homeland, and how she was betrayed by the first prince. She asked if he despised her. He did not agree and added that he was just a little surprised. Didn't he tell her on the day of signing the contract that he believed in the Elsa he saw? Protagonist asked, what about her? They held hands and she answered the same. Year 1015, March. About a year and 8 months have passed since he began raising Ars. They were walking in the forest. Ars spread his arms out and shouted at him to come here. Boars. The dragon ran towards him, hugged him and dropped him, then began to lick him. Since that heavy rain, 3 changes have occurred. First, Ars made his first friend. His name was Boars. He came up with this name by combining parts of Bobo and Ars's names. Second, considering his wish, they officially accepted him into their family. At that moment, he picked up a small chick that fell out of the nest. He said that it hurt. Apparently, Ars began to use magic better. He held the small chick in his arms and used healing magic, then climbed a tree and put it back in the nest. If Ars' ability to use various types of magic is related to consuming dragon meat, then his healing magic is probably his innate talent. And Elsa, she stood with her fists clenched and screamed joyfully. Healing magic is so rare that it's called a divine gift. Ars is a real genius, so he is very proud of him. And third, then the protagonist shouted that they are moving on to the third point. Elsa, their future goal is the desire to obtain a noble title. At least try. Slave, commoner, knight, baron, viscount, count, marquis, duke. He asked, yes, Elsa? She raised her hand and answered, it was not an easy task. Perhaps she should know the reasons for such a decision. The decision. How would they achieve it? He answered, their current social status as small merchants was extremely unstable, and their dark past could seriously damage their reputation as well. In order to ensure the safety of their child, it was necessary to raise their social status. That was the first reason. She wondered, then wasn't he going too far? Even the status of a privileged merchant would be more than enough. He smiled, added, ah, that's why there was a second reason. He wanted to have the power to crush that bastard who framed Elsa. She looked at him and screamed, is he serious now? That man is a member of the Lawrence family. He agreed and added seriously, but she thinks the one who set her up was really the first prince? She disagreed and continued, didn't the scouts have a special spell that could tell if the person giving the order was the real prince? Even if that person used magic to disguise themselves, that spell would still be able to expose them. He noticed, so it was another member of the royal family pretending to be the first prince. She exclaimed, really? The protagonist continued, it didn't make sense for the crown prince, who was first in line to the throne, to kill the king. It was most likely the work of a prince of lower rank who wanted to overthrow both the king and the first prince. She asked, since he decided to become an aristocrat to get to the bottom of the truth, why didn't he fulfill his promise to her? The protagonist asked, didn't he promise to help her with her atonement? Since her goal was to continue the king's work, she couldn't stand by when the king was in danger. That was also part of their promise. He knelt down in front of her and said, "He is the one who always finishes what he started." At that time, Ars was playing with the dragon. He raised a couple of sticks up and shouted, "Come on, evil demon. He is the greatest hero, Ars. Now he will teach him a lesson." Ars, waving a stick, rushed forward and shouted for him to defend himself. The dragon roared in response and immediately received a blow from the stick. He threw him up and dropped him on the ground. Ars got up and ran again, waving a stick at the dragon. Bors dropped him again. He jumped up, saw sparks, and everything was repeated again several times. At this time, Elsa was hanging out the laundry, turned to them and shouted. She asked them to play in a way that would not raise dust, at least until the end of the wash. He shouted back, "Good." Elsa began to hang out the laundry and thought, Ars is completely obsessed with his heroism, right? Well, yeah, what else can you expect from a boy? And he, the husband, is going away somewhere? MC agreed and added, because of one business, he will have to work a lot. She told him to take care of himself. He began to leave, then turned around, raised his hand and said, "Definitely." Then Ars came up to her, wanted to help, and shouted, "Mom." Then he brought a book, picked it up and shouted, "Mom, read this." They sat down and began to read it. After a while, she read the last lines. So, the hero Ars, who saved the world, returned to his native village, married his bride, and began to live happily. The child asked, "Do they have the same names?" She agreed and added, "The name Ars is very noble." He looked at her and asked, "Did Mom also do heroic deeds?" Elsa waved her hands and answered, "No, of course, only noble people do such things. And now she is busy, so." They together with the dragon looked at Mom, and he asked, "She does not?" "Well, yes." The dragon and Ars looked into each other's eyes, then turned around and ran to the side. Arth screamed that they were going to play ball. She raised her hand to her mouth and shouted only that they should not run too far. Then she sat alone, thought, and said, "A wedding." She remembered their conversation, where the main character said, "Well, this is roughly what the path to becoming an aristocrat looks like." She answered, "I understand, but in this case it is a long-term plan." He raised his hand to his head, agreed and added, "So he will have to work a lot, and even be absent from home often, at least for the next 5 years. He called out to her, but she was very embarrassed. She covered her mouth with her hands, then thought, no, everything is fine. Then she covered her ears and eyes. After some time, she was cleaning near the house and shouted for them to be careful. She was sweeping the yard where Bors and Ars were playing. They were looking for something in the grass. She went into the house and started cleaning, when suddenly she lost sight of the child. She ran out of the house and saw that he was standing and looking into the distance. She said, "Ars, it will soon be dark, so they should go inside." Then she called him again, came closer to him, asked what was the matter. He turned to her and started crying. She asked, "Did he hurt himself somewhere?" Ars pointed to the side with his hand, said, and continued crying. She looked and saw that Bors was sitting, and there were some sticks standing on top. Elsa asked, "Did Bors do something?" The dragon roared in response. She asked again, "Then what happened? Why is he crying, Ars?" At that moment, the doorbell rang. The protagonist came in and said that he was home. They were crying and turned to him. She said, "Husband." He looked at them in surprise and said, "What the?" But before she could finish, they showed him the sticks, and he thought, "I see." Ars wanted to please his mother, and for this purpose decided to build a wedding hall, but he did not succeed. She covered her mouth with her hands and screamed, "Ars." Then she took him in her arms, thanked him for everything he does for her. She looked at the protagonist and said, "Darling." She did not quite mean it. She understands that he is busy with work. He does not have time. But since Ars is trying so hard, she would also like to contribute. The protagonist was surprised, covered his mouth with his hand, and clarified. However, he did not say that he does not want a wedding, did he? The protagonist looked, stone seats for guests, a wooden arch, heart-shaped flower decorations. He patted him on the head and exclaimed, "This is amazing, Ars. Great job." The child pointed to the dragon and said, "Bors helped too." The protagonist added, "And he did well, Bors." The dragon roared back. Then he grabbed his shoulder and said, "Well then, he guesses Daddy will have to lend a hand too." The protagonist added and improved Ars's idea a little with magic. They watched in amazement. Then Kakyu pointed and asked, "How does he like it, Ars?" The child looked happily and exclaimed, "This is amazing, isn't it, Mom?" She agreed, then asked, "Husband, is it okay to use so much magic?" He straightened up, put his hands on his waist and answered, "Well, he didn't use too much bright magic." "Well, nothing will happen for one night, even if he uses all his strength." Afterwards, he extended his hand to her, and she extended it back. And he remembered and said, "Oh right, I completely forgot." Suddenly he snapped his finger, and in that very second she started spinning, and in a few seconds she was wearing a beautiful wedding dress. Elsa looked at him in surprise, and he smiled and clarified. Ars had beaten him to it, but by the way, he had been secretly preparing since the very day of the proposal all this time. Afterwards he asked her what she thought. Did he manage to surprise her? At the same time, Ars extended a bouquet of flowers to her. She closed her eyes, smiled, agreed, and shouted that he had succeeded, and she was very happy. They joined hands and went to the wedding ceremony. Ars and Bors were sitting in the hall and watching them. The newlyweds went up the steps. The main character raised his hand up and launched a fireworks display. MC took her hands and thanked her again for being there, Elsa. She smiled, agreed, and added, "Dear husband, Kakyu-san." The protagonist leaned towards her. Meanwhile, the dragon blocked Ars's view with its wings. Somewhere in the forest not far from the festival, a stranger was sitting and looking through binoculars. He said, "Finally found it." A little later, they were riding in a carriage, and he thought, about half a year had passed since their wedding in the forest. He and Elsa were heading to Sebas to terminate the slave contract. The headquarters of the Sebas Trading Company is located there, and for Elsa, this is an old place. This is the Kingdom of Lawrence, the land of magic. The protagonist looked at the sky, where the flying carpet was flying, and shouted, "Wow." 110:15 Sacred Calendar, October. It had been 2 years and 3 months since they had started raising Ars. He saw fruits flying in the street, spread his arms out to the sides and thought, flying carpets and magical street performances, just like in an Arabian fairy tale. Then he heard Elsa calling him, asking him to be more calm. He apologized. Elsa hides under another name, having been exiled from the royal family. A worthy spy even skillfully transforms. They walked around the city and he exclaimed, "What a beautiful city, not like Bamora." She answered, "Of course. It is the oldest existing kingdom with a history of 5,000 years. Enlightenment Square. The protagonist looked up and shouted, "What huge statues there are." She explained, "On the right is the dragon god Ragazion, the progenitor of the dragon people, and said to be the first hero. On the left is the goddess of magic, Ordamir, who according to legend was the first to bestow magic upon people. In Lawrence, the goddess of magic, the dragon god, and the goddess of creation are revered equally, and the faith here is broad and tolerant. This is the complete opposite of the Caramiel theocratic state, where the goddess of creation is considered the only and absolute truth, and strict dogmas are the basis of all teachings." He asked if she, Elsa, really admired this stern state so much. She screamed, "Of course, it must be like this. This country, the cradle of countless heroes, is now honored to have a pope, the only recipient of divine revelations in the world. Such a state simply must be strict. Every believer dreams of visiting there at least once." The protagonist thought, although perhaps from the outside everything looks exactly like that. After a while, they came to a large house, went inside, and there Sebas was waiting for them. He exclaimed, "Welcome, Mr. Kakyu," and in this dress, she looks simply charming, Miss Elsa. She held her hands to her cheeks, became embarrassed, and said, "Come on, it's just a disguise." He pointed his hand towards the room and said that he can't believe it. If it weren't for their letter, he wouldn't have recognized them, then asked them to follow him. Everything is ready, and asked, "Where is little Ars?" The protagonist answered, "Today he will stay at home. It is still better for him not to know that his parents were once slaves." She looked at him fearfully and asked, "Will Ars be okay?" He smiled and answered, "He set up a barrier so that no one can leave the territory, and removed all the dangerous objects. If they get to the city, they will be able to instantly move using teleportation, and their smart child will cope." Afterwards, he turned around and asked, "The contract can be broken instantly, right, Sebas?" He raised his hands, sighed, and replied, "It's a special contract, so it will take about 4 to 5 hours to break." MC thought, 4 or 5, Ars, Dad is really worried about him. Ars is 2 years and 4 months old. At this time, Ars was trying to break the barrier and screaming, "He's tired of this barrier, he can't go out. Because of it, he can't go for a walk." The dragon was nearby and making different sounds. The child thought, "Why can only boss go out through it? It's not fair." He remembered how Dad came up to the dragon and said, "Ors is different. He's so big that he doesn't fit in the house anymore, so he'll stay and guard." Then he suggested that they see who can outlast whom, Bors, eye to eye. They'll have a staring duel, Bors. Ars had been trying for a long time to make Bors blink, but to no avail. He exhaled and said, "Bors is not interesting at all." Then he sat down next to the cubes and shouted, "Then he'll build a tower of cubes and lie on it." And at that time, they were walking through the forest, and he shouted for them to look. This tree grows next to powerful magical creatures, so it serves as an excellent landmark. The man said with displeasure, "It started again, Victor's wisdom quiz." The other shouted for him to shut up already. Then they came closer, and he looked at the dragon and said, "He has become so big already. Haven't seen him for a year, huh?" Ars was playing with cubes and heard strange sounds of a fight. He turned around, saw how the dragon was thrown to the ground by strangers, got scared and asked, "Bors?" And at that time he pressed on the dragon's head, swung his sword and shouted, "Yes, he is a fire dragon, but he is still too young to be considered strong, so it won't do anything to him." Then he used magic, a stream of mud, and the dragon was sucked deep into the mud. He shouted to tie up his limbs. The dragon dodged and attacked them with flames from his mouth. One shouted, "He didn't say that he could breathe fire already." He shouted back that he himself did not know that. Then he added, "Okay, I'll have to do it," and shouted, "Bremus!" At that moment, a magic monkey appeared and crushed the dragon. Ars watched what was happening through the barrier, got scared, and started calling out, "Boars!" Victor screamed for them to hold him. The soldiers were trying to tie him up. Ars was standing behind the barrier and screaming, "Boars!" Then the soldiers turned around, and one of them asked, "A child?" The second one got angry and screamed. They were told that no one would be here. And at that time, a magical monkey was brought to them. It was trying to break through the barrier, but to no avail. Ars was trying to break through the barrier and screaming. He came up to it, touched it, and said, "What a strong spell." It seemed impossible to break through. He said, "This is too much." The soldiers said they were finishing. Victor said, "Whoever it was, some rich man or an aristocrat. But to build a villa deep in this forest full of magical beasts, leave it unattended, constantly maintain a magical barrier, and also keep a fire dragon as a pet. This is too crazy a hobby. He must have some very powerful magician that he keeps with him. It would be fine if he was only messing around with the lizard, but getting into the child was too much." Then he added that they should not be distracted from the goal. The soldier suggested that they go. Ars stood, waving his arms and nervously shouting for them to stop. And he called his dragon? He did not stop hitting his fists on the barrier, trying to destroy it and shouting, "Boars!" He thought, "Boars will disappear. They are taking boars away." And then his eyes lit up with fire, and he screamed, "No!" At that moment there was a loud crack. They stopped. One said, "That sound." The other asked, "Did he hear it too?" The soldier turned, listened, and said, "No, his imagination ran wild." Ars was angry, and he managed to break the barrier. He fell out into the street. His face was covered in blood. He growled, stood up, said that he had to go, and went after them. He mentally asked them to wait, and called the dragon, Ifuguru, the ruins of an ancient city sunken in the forest. Meanwhile, they entered the city. The magical monkey carried a tied dragon on itself. The inhabitants looked at it. He shouted at them not to look, but to work. Later, they put the tied dragon in a cage. He laughed and shouted, "Great that you caught him, Victor. He and his people will be paid handsomely." Then he raised his hands up and shouted, "Today they are celebrating, so they can drink as much as they want." Meanwhile, Yura was sadly sitting next to the dragon. He sat down next to her, apologized and added, "But they did not allocate much money for the dragon's treatment." Apologized again, and they walked away. Then he approached the cage and shouted, "Hey, she is a descendant of the ancients. Is she going to let him go again? So that she wouldn't do anything stupid. If she didn't have the gift of communicating with dragons, he would have already killed her." Then he asked if he ran away, she would die. Got it? She wiped the dragon with a napkin and talked to him. Yura asked why he was apologizing. After all, it was she who let him go then. He growled in response, but she understood his growl. The dragon began to lick her. She smiled and did not agree, then added it was not his fault and thanked him. She asked, "Boars? Is that his name? Did his friend give him this name?" She continued, "I see he found himself a good friend." Then she looked at him with hope in her eyes and asked, "Will his friend come and save her too?" She shook her hands and continued, Well, it's stupid. He doesn't even know where they are now, and even if he finds them, how will he defeat them all?" The dragon growled in response that he would come. He will help her, just like he helped him that rainy day. That's how it will be. She replied that he really has a good friend. That's why she wants him not to come. He overheard the conversation and laughed. Yura cried and said that she doesn't want such a good person to be killed. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The doors flew apart. They ran to the gate. One guard asked, "What kind of child is this?" Another added, "Hey, kid, where is he going?" Yura turned and asked, "What are the guards doing anyway?" The next second, there was a powerful flash. Everyone present screamed in surprise. Magic and lightning? The enemies are attacking. At that moment, Ars leaned over and screamed loudly. Everyone present grabbed their ears, trying to cover them from the loud noise. Ars raised his hands and said, "There he is, boars!" Yura opened her mouth in surprise and said, "Oh my god." He said he overlooked it, Victor. It looks like they have a tail following them. Victor put his hand forward and shouted for them to grab him. Will they be able to handle a child, incompetence? His subordinates ran to attack, and the next second, Ars screamed loudly. Smoke began to pour out of the attackers' bodies. Victor looked at this in surprise. Vitra laughed loudly. Yura covered her mouth, and Ars extended his hand to the dragon and said, "It's time for them to go home, boars." A little earlier, Yura looked at the basket in surprise and asked, "Is this an egg?" Seta confirmed it. He will tell her more. "It is a fertilized dragon egg." She wondered where it came from. He answered, "What difference does it make? The main thing is that it is here now." Then he began to hug it and said that for a researcher such a discovery is the highest degree of delight. She looked at him in surprise, and then he apologized and said that he got a little carried away, so the dragon, reborn to the origin, addressed him. Yura, he wishes for her to become a parent for his attribute power. She waved her hands and shouted, "Oh, how can I be his parent?" He put his hand forward and told her not to worry, he will arrange everything. His name is Sete. He is an expert in magic and biology. Vitra hired him for his knowledge. He is glad to meet her. The ecology of attributes is shrouded in many mysteries, and artificial breeding has never been done by anyone before. We will have to try a lot. Yura asked why the shell is so metallic. He put an egg pan, lit a fire, put the egg in, causing the egg to heat up, and said that the temperature must be increased to awaken the dragon's inner fire. She said, "Amazing, he was born." She lay down to rest. Seta stroked her head and she asked what he would eat. He said that the literature only talks about what adults eat. After a while, the dragon growled. Yura asked what he just said. The dragon growled again, and she covered her mouth and said that he called her stinky. Sete was sitting nearby and, laughing, said that it was not surprising she had not washed for a week, had she? After that, he wrote down the information and said that it turns out that the ancient legends are true. Those who have managed to find their original essence are able to establish an unbreakable connection with their unique powers. Even he is amazed at the depth of this unity. She is amazing. She always notices what others overlook, and her memory is ironclad. He is grateful to her for everything she does. If not for the current situation, he would certainly have offered her to become his official assistant. She waved her hand and said, No, he shouldn't say that. It's too flattering." Then she raised her hand and asked, "What kind of situation is this?" Seeing no reaction, she asked, "Teacher?" He said that he had made a serious mistake. In his understanding of this guild, he thought that it was dedicated to protecting refugees and homeless people, providing them with jobs, and helping them find suitable work. After all, most of the guild members are exactly that kind of people. However, the temptation to research attribute dragons was too strong for him. However, in reality, they are a gang of bandits who seize power. They kidnap refugees, force craftsmen to make weapons and grow food, and sell women and children into slavery, appropriating part of the trade routes. They have amassed a huge fortune, with which they hire cutthroats and form a huge army. Her mother, as he heard, is being held captive by them. She replied that she knows, however, she is in another place. He asked if she remembers when their homeland was attacked by demons and they fled, and Vitra protected them from the monsters. His mother always told him to be grateful to him for that. Unfortunately, the reason why she was so protected is the following. All this in order to make a pact of submission with the fire dragon and turn it into a murder weapon. Vitra's ultimate goal is to conquer the country. He was looking for a decisive force that could stand up to the entire army of the state. She asked if they could at least let this little one go. He replied that he had chosen him and this child. She wanted to sacrifice herself, but to save him? Okay, they can let him go. By the way, everything he told her now, he learned from Vitra's younger brother. He had told him about it, risking himself. He thought that he should be trusted. She should not worry. He would try to get him to help them. With these words, he stroked her head and told her to wait for him. He would be back soon. After a while, she looked at the bloody corpse crucified on the cross. Vitra said that he was still alive, although he would soon die. What a pity that this scientist, filled with sympathy, let the huge dragon escape. Damned hypocrite. It was a pity to lose such a valuable person, but the crime must be punished. His new assistant would be his younger brother. Yura thought, younger brother. Vitra grabbed her face and told her to remember. The fire dragon that was supposed to be their weapon had escaped. They would definitely get it back. If she served him faithfully as a weapon, he would not hurt her. But if she had any stupid thoughts, her mother would be next. She should not forget about it, and with these words he left a scratch on her face. She thought that if she did not become his weapon, she would lose all the people dear to her. If so, then she would have to give up everything. She would just have to give up. Meanwhile, the dragon roared. She had to watch. He said that he would definitely come. Ars extended his hand and said that it was time for them to return home. Bors. After a while, he put his hand forward and shouted, "What a rare baby, able to control magic at such a young age. If you sell him, you can get a lot of money, and if you raise him, he will make an excellent weapon. Fun. They must catch him alive." The next second, his subordinates ran to attack, but Ars dealt with them with ease. One of the present, covering herself with her hand, shouted, "Fire on water? What kind of magic is he using, this kid?" The attackers shouted, "Except for lightning, nothing special. They must deploy defensive magic and drive him into the corner of the room. You need to aim for the tendons of the arms and legs to catch him." The next second, Ars released an electric pulse again, and then shouted in surprise, "What? Why are they not afraid?" One of the attackers, holding a barrier in front of him, advanced and shouted, "Come on, they need to corral him." Then Ars grabbed him and threw him up. After that, he landed on top of the next one. He dodged the attacks, moving in a zigzag pattern. Then a huge man appeared in front of him, swinging a chain. Ars jumped up and hit his opponent in the face, knocking him to the ground. They tried to catch him, but to no avail. Ars managed to jump back, then bite their hands. The warrior shouted, "This little one is so nimble, just like an animal." Ars jumped up, flew forward and shouted, "Cool, right? After all, he plays heroes with boars every day." She said in surprise, "What? Games, seriously?" Lightning sparked next to him. Ars prepared for an attack and shouted, "A fatal blow. They should get ready." They began to cover themselves with their hands, and one of them shouted, "Something is approaching." It was magic, a lightning cannon. Powerful lightning strikes rained down on them. They began to scatter in different directions. "It seems that weak forces cannot cope here." Vitra shouted, "Hey little brother, let him deal with him." He pressed himself against the wall and objected, but he was a child. He said that he was an unfortunate coward, and Victor must deal with his own mistake. After some time, Victor was walking and saw Ars on the road, said hello and asked what his name was. The child looked at him and said loudly, "Ars." Victor smiled, raised his hand to his chest and said, "Ars, brave, good name. And he is Victor, former Night Mage of Rurlands," and added that it was nice to meet him. Frankly, he did not want to fight him and asked if he could calmly surrender. Ars did not agree. Then Victor added, "I see. It's a pity, but he already caught him." At that moment, he felt as if he was stuck in some mud. He shouted, "What is this? He can't get out." Victor looked at him and thought, wow, he got caught so easily. He thought the tendons of his arms and legs were neutralized by the mud. He noticed it will hurt if he moves, so he does not move, okay? The dragon and Yura were watching what was happening. Ars spread his arms to the sides and shouted, "Lightning!" The magic didn't work. Victor said he had foreseen everything and added, "A mud flow." The child was slowly sinking into the mud. She covered her mouth with her hands and thought, oh my god, she remembered Sete's words, who told her not to forget. She thought, of course, and screamed for Ars to use water. He heard, and at that very moment a strong stream of water began to wash away the mud. Victor said in surprise, "What the?" Ars broke free from the mud captivity and thanked her. At that moment, Victor began to attack, swung and hit with his sword, but Ars jumped, somersaulted, and hit him with his fist. They flew apart, then gathered to attack again. Ars screamed, a stone column, and ran along the column, rose up. Victor raised his head and screamed, flew into the air. Now. Stone projectiles. At that moment, projectiles flew up, pursuing Ars. He thought, the wind magic. They were spun around by force, and they both fell to the ground. The villagers stood and looked on in surprise. One said, he can't believe it. Another added, his head right through the gunfire. Have you gone crazy or something? The third asked, is this little one a monster? Yura looked through the bars and shouted, amazing. Ars got up, but before he could fully recover, he received a blow from the magic monkey and flew away. The dragon and the girl watched in fear as he flew, hit the ground several times, and finally fell. Vitra approached the bars and said, it was a funny show, but it's already boring. Too bad, Dragonkin. Another laughed and asked, is there a glimmer of hope? One of the warriors noticed, sir, we haven't gotten bored yet. The girl said, damn, Victor is really losing and she would like to fight. Yura grabbed the bars and thought, it would have been better not to come. Then the magical monkey grabbed Ars by the hood. She thought fearfully, if this continues, this child will also be like a teacher. She bent over, cried, and remembered how Seti told her to always remember, no matter what happens, to continue believing in a dream. She looked at him and asked what a dream is. He answered, it is what she wants to become, and what she wants to achieve in the future. No matter how dark the present is, if you have a dream, you can believe in the future. If even the slightest chance to change a difficult situation appears, the courage to take a step and seize this chance is born from hope and the desire for a dream. Well done, Yura. To be honest, she thought back then that what the teacher said was a lie. There really was no hope. She had to give up on her dreams and everything. But then Arskun appeared, and she thought, maybe this is hope. Maybe this is what the teacher was talking about. But no, if so, then she is just a selfish child who puts everything on others. She has to fight, show courage to go for her dream without forgetting about hope. That is her task. She will not give up anymore. She will not just rely on others anymore. She asked just now, just this once, the goddess, the dragon god. She asks them, the god of magic, to save him. He will definitely help many people in the future. He must not die here, and ask them to lend her power. She screamed, Arskun, let him wake up and run away. He looked at her and thought, what kind of Arskun is this? He remembered Seta's words when he said, Vitra, he is destined to die. She screamed again, Arskun, Ars. He looked at her furiously, and Sete appeared in his mind again. He should remember that every powerful evil always begins its path to fall with a single small spark of courage. At that moment, Ars hit the monkey, it let go of his hands, and he fell. He looked and said, did this one break the magic monkey's fang? Bors and Yura were looking through the bars, and she happily screamed, Arskun. He looked at her and thought, this little flame, then barked at them to forget about being captured and kill him. He thought, like the strong and kind hero from that picture book. The magic monkey raised its arm to strike, and he screamed, so he will never give up. He used magic and everyone was carried away. Suddenly someone screamed. They were worried when they came home, and he was not there. A female voice added, well done, when they get home, he will be reprimanded. Ars was very surprised, but it was his parents. The protagonist patted him on the head and said, for the sake of his friends, he tried so hard. He tried very hard. Well done. And now he shouted at him to leave everything to them, his parents. A few hours ago, his parents came home and saw that the barrier was destroyed. She covered her mouth with her hands and said in fear that someone had been found who could destroy the master's magical barrier. She couldn't believe it. He sat down on the ground and said thoughtfully, and from the inside, and there was only Ars inside. He looked at him and thought, but this is magical power. It is too strong. Is this really Ars's magic? He took a piece of the barrier, looked, thought, and what is this? His magic is slightly neutralized. Suddenly she raised her hand up and screamed, Master! He turned, looked and asked, Bors's fang? Elsa added, there are also traces of another large magical creature, signs of a magic battle. There are traces of Ars, but no traces of Bors are visible. The protagonist said that Bors was kidnapped by someone. It seems that he was chasing him. She screamed, if so, then we need to catch up urgently, he agreed, and added that they should go before the traces disappear. Parental authority. And at that time he said, he is the descendant of the king of beastmen, the lion king Vitra. Those hated elves who took everything from them, called them savages and banished them. He will take revenge. He will lead their people to true equality and freedom. Then he pointed to the dragon and added, this is the dragon's essence, and the weapon he spun from the egg to build a new era. They will not get it. Elsa shouted for him to disappear. Apparently, this is the leader. She will take him on. Lord, she leaves the rest to him. The protagonist held Ars and asked, he looks quite strong. Can she handle it? She replied, fighting the crowd and protecting Ars is beyond her strength, so they have no other choice. But still, Lord, he should let her deal with it. He got angry, looked at her and asked, did she dare to interrupt him for her chatter? Fine, he will accept her challenge and fight, only if she can get here. She ran up, jumped and screamed in flight, and he responded too, cutting the wind and began to attack, added magic, a leap of a breaking claw. And he, a destructive storm. The fight was strong. She attacked him in a jump, but received in response. He swung and screamed, a dark elf, a rarity, and also skillful. Is she really from that notorious family that hides in the shadows? Despicable even among elves, damn traitors, is she one of them? Elsa held balls in her hands, threw them at him and noticed that for a dirty beast he had too much of a glib tongue. Then she screamed that he was disgusting. It would be better for him to shut up. She threw stakes at him. He tried to scream in response, but the stakes hit him in the body. He screamed furiously that she should not dare insult. He turned around, swung and yelled, then to kill her, used the fang of the Lion King. She jumped up, spread her arms to the sides and thought a wide swing is a weak point, but her attacks are too light and ineffective. Then first she will deprive him of vision. And she said, Twilight. He immediately said in response, magical recoil. They attacked each other again. The fight was strong. Even from afar it was visible how houses were destroyed by their attacks. She stood up, straightened up, looked at him and said, lure the enemy into a trap, and even repelled her magic. He not only speaks, but is also smart, like a real beast. She must also make her dull mind work. Suddenly a stone fist appeared from the ground. He thoughtfully said, what the hell? What kind of creature is she? And at this time, the main character approached him. Ars saw him, smiled. Yura looked through the bars and said, it's impossible. After the protagonist stood, held Ars, looked at the fallen warriors who were lying around. Suddenly one asked, is he too strong? Don't they find it? Kakyu turned to them and told them to tell about the composition of their organization, the number of people, and the arrangement. At this time, the warrior turned and saw a man in a black cloak behind him and shouted, a magic caster. He called his warriors and pointed his hand forward. The protagonist thought, simultaneously summoning several creatures at once and controlling magical beasts. Really him. The monster laughed and shouted, the end. This is their main weapon, capable of putting to flight even the army of the Elven Kingdom. Another sarcastically asked, does he want to win? Then let him bring at least a division here. At this moment, the protagonist used Twilight. The warriors were in complete darkness, and one asked, yeah, hey, is that enough already? The protagonist laughed and asked, maybe they should just give up? Then the warriors ran away. One shouted that they had to run. Another exclaimed, he is a monster. He turned around and started calling, a magic caster. He saw only a cloak lying on the ground and screamed, run away, he has already escaped. The protagonist raised his hand and said how bad it is to run away without even looking at the person's face. Later, he tied up all the warriors and thought, that's it, I guess? Ars smiled and looked at the protagonist happily and shouted, great, Dad is so strong. The protagonist laughed and asked, really? Later, he thought, it's a little worrying that they missed one of the most problematic ones, but now something else is more important. Surround the castle. Don't let anyone out, there are still plenty of enemies outside. Wow. In the worst case, those trapped inside can be forcibly deprived of their memories, but if someone outside finds out about his power, then the situation will be uncontrollable and better. The protagonist walked towards the cage and saw children hiding behind him, and he held out his hands and shouted for him to wait. He gave up, and asked him not to touch those children. He replied that he would do nothing to them, then asked him if he would help him open it. He took the key, inserted it into the lock, and the lock opened. The dragon looked at him in surprise and growled. He asked, "Well, Boris, is he okay? Is he hurt?" The protagonist raised his hand forward and shouted for him to go and make some noise outside. Then he thought that the others would sort it out themselves. At that moment, Yura clenched her fists and shouted for him to stop, and asked him to wait a little. He looked at her in surprise and asked who she was. She came out of the cage and introduced herself. Her name is Yura. She has the gift of speaking with the dragon, that's why she was entrusted with taking care of him. Then Ars pointed his finger at her and shouted, when he was in danger, she saved him. The protagonist asked, "What?" Afterwards, he shook her hands and thanked her, and added that he would definitely thank her. She answered sheepishly, "No need. Absolutely no need. But besides that, there are many slaves and artisans here who are forced to work, so she believes that Boris cannot be sent alone." He was surprised, she continued, but she does not want to shift it to others anymore, she herself. MC stroked her head and said that he understood. He trusted her to go with him, and she would guide Boris. He smiled and thought, yes. And at this time they continued the fight. Elsa said, "Night darkness," and Vitra shouted, "Reflection of magic." They jumped up and began to attack each other in the air, blow after blow. Elsa landed on the roof, and at that time he hit the roof with his fist hard. Stones fell down. She spread her arms, jumped up. There was an abyss under her. The monster began to throw large stones at her. Elsa tried to hold the stones with her body. Then Ludo Zamstrorik jumped through the hole in the roof. He stood on a pile of stones, looked around and asked if he had finished her off. Elsa was standing behind a column and listening to their conversation. He replied, she was still there, camouflaged herself well in the dark. He sighed and said, it would be impossible to aim, then stretched out his hand forward and added, that means he would blow her away along with everything around her, and shouted, a whirlwind of a total storm. At that moment, everything started spinning in a whirlwind. People on the street looked at it in fear. One exclaimed, a tornado? Vitra laughed ominously. He scratched his head and said, everything was leveled to the ground. That's too bad. It seems that she was also smeared. Suddenly he received a quiet blow to the neck. Elsa sat on his neck unnoticed and stuck a needle into his neck. He turned, saw the needle, pulled it out, got angry and asked, what is it? What the hell did she do? She stood in front of him completely unnoticed. He thought invisibility, and without even a pronunciation or spell, as soon as he was about to launch a spell, she, without making a sound, quickly approached, crept up invisibly, in ambush under his feet, where the blow did not reach, hid until he launched a blow over a wide area, waiting until he was completely sure of victory. So all this persistent recitation of useless spells and feigned rage in the darkness was only a distraction, designed to show that she did not have a decisive attack, to drive him to where there would be no escape, so that he himself would launch a spell over a large area, believing in victory, relax, and then she struck. All of it was a bluff. She poisoned his balance system, paralyzed the vestibular apparatus, and at the same time sharpened his 5 senses. Now for him, any light, sound, even smell will become a deadly weapon. A little more time will pass. The game between sleep and reality will collapse. He will stop lying to himself, but he will not die. He cannot worry. Elsa looked at him and noted, besides, her husband doesn't like unnecessary killing. She remembered Seva standing nearby and asking, does she remember the children they took under protection in Bamora about 2 years ago? She answered, of course. He continued, recently the results of the investigation came from the Holy City. The organization that sold those children is called the Revival of the Lion King. They usurped power over Bamora through the scandal with the fire dragon, engaged in the sale of weapons made from dragon materials and illegal slave trade. The head of this organization is listed as a merchant only on paper, but in fact, the leader of the dark side is Vitra. She grabbed his hair, pulled him up and said, she has so many questions for him. He screamed, no. Let her stop. At that moment a dragon flew over them. They ran away. One said, damn, they can't handle an elemental dragon. Another shouted for them to run. The people stood and watched, and Victor shouted for them to get out of the way. They were slaves. If they tried to resist, the leader would skin them. The seller shouted back. They were no longer his slaves. They should have looked around. They turned and saw Elsa with her foot on Vitra's throat, and the protagonist and Ars folded their arms over their chests and smiled, and next to them on sticks hung the skulls of a magical monkey and a dragon. Then a dragon flew towards them, and on its back sat Yura. The warriors raised their hands and said that they surrendered. They were standing on a stone wall, Elsa said. Apparently they had 180 fighters, plus about 300 family members and slave workers, not a small number. The protagonist added, they say that they have branches and bases in the surrounding areas. Most of them are slaves, but if you take into account all the lower units, it comes to 2,000 people in total. She spread her hands and told him to imagine only 2 people captured the stronghold of such a large organization. If this becomes known, it will not be good, right? He already tied him with chains to a pole, scratched the back of his head, and said loudly, "That's it," she continued, "but they can't help but inform the authorities. There are a lot of wanted criminals among them. Will they destroy everything? They still have no forgiveness." He asked menacingly, "Elsa?" She replied that she was joking. He, kneeling, looked at them and told them to calm down, to look. They were tied up. So what, right? He shouted at him to shut up. They have not forgotten what they did to the child slaves. They are still facing the death penalty. If they are going to execute them, what difference does it make? He asked to spare them. They also have families. He barked. He told him to shut up. Then he swung his sword. He cowered in fear, and Ars suddenly appeared between them. He said in surprise, "What? What just happened?" He spread his arms, smiled, and screamed, "The fight is over. So let them make peace already." They did not even want to look at each other. Later, the protagonist sat down on a stone wall and wanted to say something. Elsa brought her hand to her head and said, "Ars, what is he doing?" Suddenly, the protagonist covered his mouth with his hand and laughed, then shouted mysteriously, he had a great idea. She looked at him and thought about his face, the insidious plan in his soul. Bulkry Forest, unspecified location. MC asked, "Is this their base?" Remus answered, "A communications center, set up in the ruins of an old fortress. They monitor external threats and hold hostages here." He said thoughtfully, "Hostages, then." He picked up his helmet and clarified that the workers should not escape. They were capturing their relatives. He looked through his binoculars and replied, "I see. Well, they will figure it out quickly." The trading city of Pomora, the guild hall of the Lion King's revival. They entered the hall. He said, "All commercial activities of Pomora are concentrated here. But they are interested in the unofficial side, the headquarters of the intelligence department. They collect information about kings and aristocrats there, and also conduct illegal financial transactions. It is located in the dungeon." She replied, "I see, so this is her part of the job." Protagonist raised his hand and shouted, "So, attention, ladies and gentlemen." He held a photo of Vitra in his hands and added, "Their leader is now in their hands. Therefore, the guild is disbanded, and they become part of their organization." He stood up from his chair and asked in surprise, "What?" The protagonist and Elsa stretched out their hands, and he said, "Their job will remain the same. So they don't have to worry." She continued, "But from now on, they will follow their orders." They screamed, "No way." They swung their swords, rushed to attack with a cry, "Kill them." They said that if anyone decides to resist, they will eliminate them, so be reasonable. After a few blows, they lay defeated on the floor, and the guards covered them with spears. A few days ago, Elsa asked, "Buy a title using a dark guild?" He agreed and added, "Simply put, they bring Vitra and the others as an offering, and in exchange they demand the king grant them a title." She raised her hand to her forehead and waved the other one and told him to wait. This contradicts his words. He just said that it won't work like that. Didn't he? He continued, "They don't need to hide the fact that the guild was liquidated, only that they did it together." Then asked, she remembers what they talked about before, right? 1. Spread the rumor that the master has a personal army. 2. Then create it and recruit fighters with the money received. 3. Gain recognition through trade privileges. 4. And then get a title, right? It will take about 5 years? He answered, "Right. And now they have their own army." She spread her arms out to the sides, disagreed and added, "But they don't have one. To create an army, and even within 5 years." The protagonist chuckled, then pointed his hand back and said, "They do have an army. Here it is." She asked, did he mean to say, use the fighters of the Dark Guild? Take those they defeated and put them up as mercenaries? He laughed and agreed. Great honor, glory, money, pleasure, women. Not all of them became criminals because of their own pain. If you give them the role of heroes, that they crush the villains, then many will agree to play it. Fighters, financial base, information, as well as new territories. Even a criminal organization will not refuse such riches. If you add to this the captured criminals and then get a strong army, economic power, and real lands, then the whole balance of power will change. After they walked down the street, people worship them, and she asked, "The king is more likely to want to give a title than to make such a person his enemy. Is that what he means?" He raised his hand and shouted, "Exactly. From trouble, opportunity." She continued, "Although still, to provide assistance not only to refugees, but also to criminals, the master is too kind." He replied, "Nothing of the sort. He just uses what can be used, and also, instead of reducing the number of enemies, it is easier to increase the number of allies." In the meantime, they reached the hospital, and he asked how the treatment is going. The healer turned around and said, "Quite successfully." He thought they would have trouble since there were few healer mages among them. But, a little while later, Ars stood before them, and Clem asked, "Who is he, young master?" Although their healing skill is poor, he uses a huge amount of magic power, just forcibly making wounds heal. The healer asked, "They don't drain all their magic, right?" Elsa held her head in her hands and thought, "This is incredible, just incredible." He replied, "Well, so they don't worry, he has plenty of it." Ars approached Clem. He asked, "Hey boy, he certainly has nothing to complain about, but is he sure?" He looked at him with interest and asked, "What?" Galen asked, "Did he forget what they did to him?" Ars raised his head and said in surprise, "But Bors had returned to him, and the uncles he had wounded were now here too. If they wanted to make peace, they had to take away all the pain first, right?" The wounded laughed loudly. Galen grabbed his head and shouted, "What a boy!" He was amazed. Lion asked, "And he disarmed us so easily?" Galen smiled and asked, "Did he need anything else from him?" He looked at him and asked if he could touch his horn. He answered, "Of course." Ars reached for the horn, but at that moment Elsa called him and said that it was time to go back. She thought it was enough. He began to resist and said, "But he's still." Ars did not have time to finish speaking as she grabbed him, lifted him up and added, "That's enough, we need to finally rest." He sat in her arms and said, "Mom." He asked why everyone looked so different. She answered, "Because they were all different races." He looked at her and asked, "Race? If it was different, then why were they all so different?" She made a few incomprehensible sounds, then said, "Well, you know, this world was created by the goddess of creation, and they are her priceless treasures. And treasures come in all sorts of colors and shapes, and the more variety there is, the more beautiful they are. I guess that's how it was meant to be." He looked at her in surprise. She put him down on the ground and continued, "Well, there are many answers to such questions. But one day, Ars, he will find his own." They turned around, and she told him to look. "There is an orphanage here. She thinks that making friends is also an important lesson." He ran, turned to her, and shouted that he was going. The protagonist looked at him and said, "Ars is much more confident in expressing his thoughts now." She said thoughtfully, "Time flies so quickly," then asked, "By the way, how would the master answer this?" He hesitated, then answered, "He would say something like the result of natural selection." She answered, but it was not an interesting answer at all, and he shouted, "What an injustice." At that moment, Ars approached the children and shouted, "Hi!" They turned around, surprised, and one shouted, "Is this the son of Lord Kakyu?" Another asked, "A high-ranking person?" He answered, "He defeated one of the leaders." He exclaimed in surprise, "Wow, that's cool." But it was scary. The children were scared. One said that it was time for him to help his father and walked away. The girl shouted that she did too. Another grabbed his stomach and said that he thought his stomach hurt, and so Ars was left standing alone. Then he looked out from behind the bushes and saw a boy pointing at her and shouting, "Hey, Yura! Why is she protecting them?" She covered the children with her arms and said, "These children are not guilty of anything." He shouted back, "But they are Vitra's children. Because of his lineage, they were carried in his arms, and now she is in league with them?" She disagreed and shouted back at him to get out of the way. He didn't know what they had to go through because they... Before she could finish speaking, the boy grabbed the stone and screamed, "Monsters!" She closed her eyes, but at that moment, Ars appeared in front of her, and the entire blow of the stone fell on him. He said, "Those who offend his friends," then he sparkled and screamed, "He will not forgive." The boy and his friends were very surprised, began to ask for forgiveness, told him to wait, but he had already used magic. She grabbed him and screamed, "No, Ars, don't!" The children ran away. Ars said, "Yura, lightning." She was on her knees, holding him with her hands with her last strength and asked him to forgive them. "Ars, there is no one here who would have someone dear." She quietly began to slide to the ground. He turned and shouted, "Yura!" He crouched down next to her and said, "The same." Some time passed. She woke up, opened one eye. A dragon was sitting next to her, saw that she had moved, and began to lick her. Yura raised her hand and shouted, "Bors, stop!" Nearby, Ars was playing with the children. He saw that she had woken up and shouted, "Yura has woken up." Then he asked her for forgiveness for the lightning and said he used healing magic. Did the pain go away? She got up and said, "Ars, he is with those guys." He raised his hand and shouted, "Ima-chan and Maka-kun, they are friends now." Maka-kun hung on him and shouted, "Ars is good." She laughed and shouted, "That's how it is." Then he came up and kissed Ars. She laughed, exhaled, said, "Well then." She looked at her clothes and asked, "Why?" "Clothes." He apologized and quietly answered, "It's because of his lightning." She covered herself with the blanket more tightly and asked, "So he saw?" Her back. She was worried that she had little wings on her back that she couldn't use. He happily agreed and shouted, "She looked so cool." She said in a dissatisfied tone, "Cool? There was nothing cool about that." He disagreed and added, "Cool. Can she fly?" She answered in a dissatisfied tone that she couldn't, they were too small. He clenched his fists and asked, when she got bigger, would she be able to fly? Would his own grow too? She didn't agree. People don't grow wings. He asked, "Yura, she could talk to boars, right? He could talk too. So he was a dragon god too." She told him to wait and calm down, then asked, wasn't he scared? He disagreed and asked, why should he be? She explained, well, the unknown is usually scary. He disagreed and added, realizing that you don't know something is fun. She said, "Ours, he's amazing, so small, but he thinks like her teacher." She began to remember. She poured water and said that she wanted to be born ordinary. He asked why, and added he would envy her in her place. She shouted, "Teacher, but he is special to them. They say that she is a child of ancestors and blessed by the dragon god, but when they see her wings and scales, they immediately begin to whisper behind her back." They carried water, and she continued. They called her a half-breed, a monster. Seta said that people fear everything they don't know, be it magical beasts, demons, or even other people. But if you figure it out, there will be no fear. You can find a way to coexist. That is why he became a magibiologist, to prevent conflicts with knowledge. She said, then it would be better if differences did not exist at all. He laughed and added, but then no one would strive to know the other. It is because of the difference that they want to understand. He said he chose this job to avoid conflicts. But in reality, at first it was much simpler. He was just interested in studying the differences. They looked up, and there were birds circling around. At that time, she looked at ours and said, if everyone thought the same, then maybe his worries would disappear too. He answered, "Is that so?" Then he screamed, "He got it! Mom's riddle." She looked at him in surprise, and he continued to scream. The differences between races are to make conversations more interesting. The differences exist so that they can get to know each other. That's why she has so many differences, Yura. He came closer to her and screamed so that more people could get to know her, and they could become friends. She looked at him and thought, that's it, this child, he is a ray of light in the darkness. She said, yes, it would be great if that were true. She is very grateful to him. They were walking through the forest and she said, Ars, he knows she wants to be a scientist. He asked what? She explained, someone who studies things they don't know and shares their knowledge with the world. Then she asked, what about him, Ars? He screamed, he's going to be a hero. He clenched his fists and continued, just like mom and dad. No, he wants to become even stronger. She replied that she believed, Ars, he would become a hero who is not only strong, but also able to save people's hearts. Later, they saw a carriage passing by. They screamed, Uncle? They ran towards him. Suddenly, she appeared from behind the carriage and asked, Yura? She looked at her and asked in surprise, Mom? Then she recognized her and screamed, Mom. They ran towards each other, hugged. Ars stood and smiled happily. Then Elsa said, the master is really kind. He turned and said, kind? No, he is simply returning a debt that he did not have time to repay in the past. She looked at him and thought, this is what kindness means. This is a debt that he pays back to his dear people. December 1015, Elvrant Federated Royal State, the holy city of Astanarf. After some time they arrived in the city, the ancient holy dragon tree, the peak, Astokino Castle. Meanwhile, Marisa went into the office and said, Her Majesty, a man calling himself the merchant Kakyu has appeared in the barracks of the Knights of the Magic Order and seeks an audience with Her Majesty. She sat on the throne and said, so this is the same person from the letter. The contents seemed suspicious. She answered, but it seems to be true. The protagonist and the others stopped at the entrance. He pointed his hand to the side and said he had captured the S-rank criminals, including Vitra and 12 other wanted criminals, as well as 35 members of the Dark Guild Lion King's Radiance executives. In this regard, as a reward, he formally requests the title of aristocrat and a domain. She raised her hand and replied, a mere merchant had dealt with an S-rank gang, and even dared to come and ask for a title. That was funny. His Majesty ordered him to be brought in. The gate opened, and they began to enter. She shouted to keep their guard up, to use the magic shackles and act carefully. He asked to be released. He would not run away. They did not answer him, and he spat. The protagonist walked. The villagers looked at him. One said, Kakyu. It was that one. The other agreed and noted that recently there had been rumors about a certain merchant among the merchants. They say even bards have composed songs about him. The resident said that he knows he easily defeats monsters that hunters and adventurers cannot handle, ensuring safety on the roads. No one has ever seen his face. Does he really exist? The protagonist thought that, thanks to his diligence in following orders, the rumors about him became more convincing. He should thank those who helped him. Then he heard someone shout behind him, Kakyu. Where is he? A mid-level merchant. He turned and said, Kakyu. It is he. The worker waved his hand and added, Her Majesty has deigned to receive him. Let him follow him. MC walked into the office and she introduced herself. She is Iurga Jormoisnoit, the second queen of the Federated Kingdom of Elvrant. This time he acted honorably, Kakyu. The protagonist knelt down and said, oh no, her words were too flattering for him. The queen giggled and told him not to bother. She was just a symbol that united the Federation. A queen for show. The real power was in the hands of the local aristocrats. He knew that, right? He didn't understand. What nonsense. He asked for an audience, not a personal meeting with the queen. Didn't such things usually go through the generals or ministers? No, he shouldn't worry. The Elven Knights defeated the enemy and captured prisoners, which showed their strength. The advantages were on their side. It was even convenient. Kakyu continued. Today he was grateful for the opportunity to be received by Her Majesty. He thought that if direct communication with the queen would allow him to quickly obtain a title and lands, then that would be good. He had already studied the old landowners and the laws. She agreed and added that she heard his request. She would acknowledge his merits and those of his troops and reward him with a title and lands. The protagonist raised his head, smiled, and asked, "What?" Her Majesty held her chin in her hand and asked, "What? Is he dissatisfied? Greedy guy, huh?" MC stretched his hands forward, shouted, "No, this is more than enough," and thought, "Seriously? That simple?" He thought there would be more checks and negotiations. Her Majesty turned to the side and said, "The award ceremony will be held in a month. She will send a letter. He can do with the refugees as he sees fit. The lands will be managed through an appointed manager, so he must follow his instructions. Now he can go." He bowed his head and said, "Okay." Later, they were riding back, and he asked, "Manager?" "The Chamber of Commerce of the port city of Pomor, former Dark Guild of the Lion King's Radiance." Luran exclaimed that he was amazed. Shuren put her hands on her waist and shouted, "He would really become an aristocrat, and all thanks to their help. He should be grateful." Luran ordered her to mind her manners. She asked if he could spoil them a little, like lowering the taxes. He scratched his head and thought. After some time, he was in the office and Marisa answered, "Lord Kakyu, he does not have such judicial authority. As for such matters, so he should address her as the viceroy, the executive viceroy of the vast territory of Porkley, Marisa Parzival." Later, they stood near the table and looked. She asked, "What is this?" He answered, "The plan for the reconstruction of the old Porkley highway." She said, "I see. If it is completed, it will become a large source of tax revenue. Okay. But the budget will have to be cut a little." He was surprised. She continued, "In addition, all tax revenue will be temporarily under their control." He said, "Okay." Meanwhile, they were sitting in the bushes, and she asked, "Hey Lauren, what does this mean? After receiving the title, didn't he become an aristocrat? A noble with a holding owns lands and residence, with powers proportionate to their scale. A noble without a holding has no powers related to the land, and often has no real power to match his title, so he is called an honorary aristocrat." Lauren replied, "This is the same honorary aristocrat of landless holdings, an empty title with no real power." She screamed, "Is that so?" Disappointment. He screamed that he heard everything. She spoke so loudly on purpose. He said, "How cruel." After a while, they were sitting at the table. She handed him a cup of tea, and he screamed. Damn, he was outplayed. Becoming a noble with a holding would give him the shortest path to getting closer to the royal family of Lawrence. What kind of nominal title is this? A damn cunning woman, this queen. An arrogant elven monarch. She noticed, or rather, she is a high elf, 1,000 years ago. Using spirit magic, she contributed to the victory over the demon king who ruled this land. She is the daughter of a hero king who bore the name Astanai, a glorious lineage. Rumor has it that she has lived for almost 1,500 years. He was surprised and said, 1,500? Then he took a sip of tea and thought, is there really a person in this world that he cannot surpass in life experience? She asked, did he try to negotiate? He answered, of course he tried. He remembered the conversation. He said, these lands were made by refugees, and since he defeated Vitra, who controlled them, the right to own them is his. She answered, no, 500 years ago. The forest was abandoned due to a dragon plague, but it was originally the fiefdom of the Duke of Porkley, and it was never officially ceded. The protagonist noted that the heirs of the Highland Duke had long since been adopted by other houses, so his line had ceased to exist. She answered that it was true, therefore the land was now hers. He said, however, that for the last 112 years, no records of its management had been kept. She wondered, it was merely 120 years. Is there a problem? It was unlikely that his ambitions were so great that without land ownership, they would remain unfulfilled. Or perhaps he simply did not realize it. Either way, she felt that he only needed the title of nobility as a means to achieve his goals. She did not trust those who lacked ambition. At this, she raised one hand to her chin and extended the other forward, smirked, and told him to prove his ambition to her. Merchant Kakyu. He has a month until the award ceremony, and she thought, if so, she would consider it. A little later, he came home, sat at the table and told Elsa everything. She thought about it, put her hand to her chin and said, ambition, then. Although she hadn't really intended to give him land in the first place, she would have to find another way. Even without real power, one can gradually gain influence in the royal court, like Sebas did. She looked at him and said, if so, then quite, yes, sir. Perhaps she should not say such a thing considering their position, but when he gave orders to the refugees and mercenaries, he looked truly alive, as if he had returned to his native land after a long separation. But now he looks lonely. Before, since he needed the land to realize his plans, it seems to her that he himself, without even realizing it, longed for it. He took the mug in his hands, looked at his reflection in the water, and asked, he. Suddenly the front door opened. Silga walked in and shouted. There he was! He was congratulating him. Then he pointed towards the door and shouted in a satisfied voice. He brought him great news, so that he would let him introduce himself. The protagonist replied, He was, as always, too loud. He was actually trying to think here. At that moment, Rihanna Sebas entered the room and introduced herself. She thanked him for his constant patronage of her husband. They were opening a branch in Pomor and came to pay respects. He took her hands and shouted, "Sebas, she is his wife. It is a great honor." A little later, the women were holding hands, and Elsa said that she was pleased to meet her, and Rihanna replied that she was pleased too. The men stood a little further away, and the protagonist thanked Silga and asked if he was sure about this. After all, he is a sea merchant, which means he now has competition. He replied, "No big deal, all the ships are his anyway. The main thing is to boost the economy, and no matter who the heads of the largest trade unions are, they are all people in the end. In 100 years, they will be the ones laughing on deck." The protagonist noticed that he was no longer surprised at how elves perceive time. Silga, even the queen, would probably like him. He asked what was he talking about. Then they went out onto the balcony, looked at the sea, and Silga said, so she told him to show his ambition, an interesting offer. The protagonist was surprised, right? What does ambition even mean? Doesn't his desire to become a nobleman count? He asked, does his goal necessarily require being a nobleman with lands? He thoughtfully said, well, that would probably really be the shortest path. He thinks there are other options, so he will not lay claim to this land, and managing it is too much trouble. And he replied, it seems there is more to it than that. It is probably not that he has no ambition. He wants the territory deep down, but he does not understand the reason why he wants it. Then he asked, didn't the queen see it in him, Kakyu? The protagonist thought for a moment, and then asked, then let him tell him where his ambition comes from. He folded his arms across his chest, looked into the distance and thought, then answered, to be honest, he recently had his 29th child. The protagonist looked at him, smiled and asked, what? So many? Come on, is he serious? Let him not avoid the answer. He answered that he is not avoiding it. He asked a very deep question. From where? The protagonist said, but where does ambition come from, for which one can sacrifice even one's principles? So what is it? The answer is obvious, family. He smirked and continued, in fact he had the same. Silga turned and walked away, waved his hand and added, now that he understood this, it's a small matter. The protagonist stood and thought. He should calmly think for a month. Why does he want this land so badly? What does it mean for him and his family? What is the real reason? The ancient city of Iful. After some time, some children were kicking a ball around, and the protagonist was watching them. A boy shouted, there it goes. Another one, who was running with a sword, shouted that he will not give it up. A girl shouted. Ars was standing nearby and shouted to leave it for him. They threw him a ball. He jumped up, caught it with his hands and shouted that he was catching it. The protagonist shouted, Ars, you can't do that. How many times do I have to tell you that you can't touch it with your hands? Then he thought, oh no, 3 weeks flew by in an instant. Being a child must be great. They don't have any deadlines. Then he grabbed his head and thought, damn it. He was about to understand, but he needed the final push. At that moment, Ars came up to him and asked, Dad, is he okay? Does he want to eat? She handed him the food and told him to take it. It would give him strength. He thanked her and added that he felt better now. Ars asked if it was tasty. He agreed and added that it tasted like his native land. Then they heard some screams, and he asked if they were screams from the training camp. They ran there and saw 2 people arguing. The protagonist shouted for them to stop. Vremus extended his hand and said that he would not let him go. He replied that he could not do this anymore, Vremus. He grabbed him by the jacket and shouted, he is such a weakling, he cannot be the head of the mercenaries. He will prove that even as a leader he will be better than him. He asked how he is going to do it. He answered, he will pass the test of fangs. He continued, but it is dangerous. Isn't this a tradition that has been forbidden for many decades? And besides, will Kakyu-san approve of such an act? He replied, it would be a testament to his strength and courage. He didn't expect special treatment because of his kinship, stupid younger brother. He let him go, waved his hand and said, see you later, weakling Vremus. After everyone left, he was left standing alone near the wall, and behind the wall at that time were the protagonist and the children. Earlier, they dug snow. Arno said, Kakyu, yes, he's a master at using a shovel. He agreed and added, it was not for nothing that he was born among the eternal snows. Even now it is felt in him. He asked in surprise, wow, has his memory really started to return? He answered sadly, alas, only partially. He said that he understood him, and added that he was happy for him. The protagonist looked at him and said, Arno, what would he say? Doesn't he suspect him of lying? What if he was some kind of murderer, or a complete villain? Then what? He stood up, put the shovel down next to him and replied, no matter what, in that case he would become a criminal himself. He turned around and asked, what? Why all of a sudden? He explained, he was a professional soldier. In that war, he destroyed many lives. He stole from the fields to survive. He eliminated deserters from his unit. The victors are hailed as heroes, but in fact they are the same murderers, a peace treaty, a draw. The people of the city avoided him. He pointed to the side and added, those who settled in such remote settlements, they simply ran away from their past. And yet, each of them tries to live with dignity, leaving the shadows of the past behind. Do you agree, Kakyu? Isn't he one of them too? This village accepts everyone, no matter what. When they laid the foundation of the village, everyone unanimously decided to make this place their new home. Yura looked out from behind the tree and thought, Kakyu-san. Nearby Vrimus was sitting on the roots of a large tree and thoughtfully asking why exactly he was chosen as the commander of the mercenaries. The protagonist was fishing nearby. He grinned in surprise and said, but for him, everyone here was a stranger. The reason was extremely simple. When he proposed a punishment exchange as an alternative to the service of his mercenaries under their command, everyone hesitated. Looking at Vitra and the higher management, only he raised his hand without hesitation. The one who takes responsibility first always makes enemies, especially if it concerns treason. He decided that he could entrust this to someone who was ready to take on such a burden, but asked that he allow him to ask what prompted him to raise his hand. He answered, he was simply afraid of his older brother all his life. When he was 10 and he was 1 year old, a tragedy occurred. He cruelly dealt with the elven wanderers. When asked about his motives, he simply answered, because they were nearby. His father, fearing complications in relations with an old enemy, the king of the elves, imprisoned his brother. But when he turned 13, he escaped and destroyed all their brothers and father, and then took the place of the head of the clan. Brother had a fierce hatred for the elves, as sworn enemies of their city, supposedly due to historical reasons. But the brother had ambitions, as well as the determination to unite their people. A country without discrimination and persecution, free and bright, where the children of their people could look to the future with hope. But when he had a child, he was entrusted with caring for him. He began to share these ideals, but the methods were wrong. If this continues, these children will also go down the bloody path of power. He had to be stopped, but he was afraid. He continued to play the role of a despicable villain, obeying his orders. And then, he screamed that the fire dragon must be released. Sete gestured with his hand for him to be quiet. He asked why he was telling him this, as if he could hide it. Sete said he knew he had children, he just needed to let the dragon go, that's all. He asked in surprise, what was that? Was he really going to sacrifice his life? He raised his hand behind his head and laughed. But this is not funny. He said he should come to his senses immediately. It was not worth risking his life for this. He noticed if he didn't do it now, many more people would suffer in the future. That's what he said. He shouted back, but he didn't have to. Sete asked, who should do it then? His homeland was once devastated by monsters. Many friends died, his daughter too. The reason was banal. They were hunting the child of a fierce monster. He was mistaken for another creature. The angry parents attacked. It was a tragedy of ignorance. His dream was to reveal all the secrets and create a world where everyone would understand each other and live without wars. He answered, stupid idealism. He closed his eyes and continued, but he, not having the strength to fight, dedicated his life to this naive dream. He is too old, so he wants to pass on knowledge to the younger generation. In a short time, he passed on everything possible, both knowledge and will. He looks at this child and remembers his dead daughter. If his life saves the child's future, he will be happy. Then he asked, does not he understand this as a parent? He agreed. Now he understands. He too was entrusted with something important then, something so important that it was worth risking his life. He said thoughtfully, the ideals of his brother and the doctor, both were partly right, but somewhere they were wrong. He cannot know which answer is correct. But when he realized this, he felt the need to act. So then he raised his hand, then apologized for the long speech. Despite the loud words, he still did not change at all. After all, he is not worthy of being a commander. He is not of that kind of flight. At that moment, a fish bit him. He raised his fishing rod, and it hit him in the face. He answered, indeed, but he, Vrimus, should be the commander. It suits him better. Thanks to him, it seems, he found a solution to his problem. He held the fish in his hands and asked, problems? Suddenly, the protagonist heard a noise, turned towards the forest and screamed, what is this? Afterwards they entered the forest and saw Vitra grab the cub and shout for them to attack. In the name of all that is holy, he will destroy them. The protagonist held on to a tree and asked, what the hell? What is going on here? Vrimus grabbed his head and asked, is he really going through the test of the fang? He asked, a test? He explained, this is an ancient rite of the lion tribe, a way to choose the most powerful and brave fighter among the tribe to determine the new leader. The task is to kidnap the baby from the chimera's lair and return alive. He screamed for it to stop for God's sake. The protagonist looked around and thought, the viceroy is looking at them now. He can't act arbitrarily. At that moment, he attacked Vrimus, and he tried to hold him back. He asked him to return the child. He chuckled in surprise. He yelled, faster! At that moment, the baby managed to break free. It ran forward. He wanted to run after him with a menacing roar, but Vrimus pounced and knocked him to the ground. He apologized and added, "He scared him." They returned the child. Vrimus asked him to calm his anger and go home. Then he apologized to Kakyu-san and added that this entire incident is his responsibility. He promises it will not happen again. Therefore, he begs, for the sake of his honor, that he forgive them. As the leader of the tribe, as the commander of the mercenaries, he will definitely unite everyone. Only he can do this, he realized it. The protagonist held his neck and said, well, he allows it. After that, he extended his hand forward and said that they had begun. Vrimus, at the upcoming awards ceremony, he would accompany him as his servant and watch him closely. After some time, he came to the palace. The queen was sitting on the throne. He thought, he will demonstrate what only he can do. Her Majesty said finally he is here, so that he will let her see his ambition. The protagonist knelt down on one knee, lowered his head and said, the ambition that Her Majesty spoke of means an unwavering determination to follow your dream, even if it means paying with your life. And for him, the ideal is to have a homeland. She brought her hand to her mouth, coughed and said, what a pompous statement from an outsider. He looked at her and replied that he was returning these words to her. Then he continued, in this land, they are all strangers. The only difference is that if someone has a place to return to, those of them who own lands and houses, even more so here, are big strangers. One of those present shouted, how dare he? At this moment, Her Majesty interrupted him and told MC to continue. Orkly has been practically deserted for 500 years, and under the influence of the magical energy of the dragons, countless ferocious monsters have become active there. Managing and developing such a huge territory will require colossal costs and involve incredible risks. He does not intend to belittle the dignity of their ancestors at all. He simply believes that for noble families who already own lands, developing border territories will be unprofitable. But for those like them who do not have their own lands, the relative benefit will be greater. They will be able to actively promote development even then. The queen told Kakyu-san she understood that he was a born merchant, but talk of rationality and profit was tiresome. She asked him to show ambition. He continued, his and his son's home was a pioneer settlement, a place where those who had lost their previous homes gathered. He himself was found by this settlement, and it was thanks to it that he now stands here as a man. It was precisely because they had no homeland that they all strove with all their souls to make this place one. They risked their lives for the village and cared for their comrades. This village was his ideal. Well, it was burned by bandits, and now it is no more. The protagonist raised his head and added, so this time he will create a new one. And he needs this land, for his son who never knew a homeland, and for his wife, driven from her home, where she could return. He wants to build a new home. They will protect it with all their might. He swears that this will not harm the interests of the country in any way. Oddly enough, only those who, like in the village of Joran, lost their homeland gathered in Borkley. He does not need an ideal world or a state. He just wants his home back. What ours was supposed to gain, what he lost, he will recreate on these lands and this time protect with his own hands. So he asks her to let them make this place their homeland, to raise Ars the happiest person in this world. She laughed and added, she asked to show, but did not expect such an emotional turn, but it is interesting. Her ancestor often said something similar, 1,000 years ago, when he united the elf tribes and founded this country. She liked it, Kakyu. From now on, he can bear the name Borkley. To the title and reward is added the right to own the land. He agreed and then thanked her, Her Majesty. Later they rode in a carriage. The villagers smiled and joyfully waved their hands at them. Ars clenched his fists and shouted, wonderful, wonderful. Everyone is so happy, Dad. Everyone is so amazing. Yura agreed and added, these people are sincerely grateful to Kakyu-san. Ars said, and he too, he also wants to be useful to Dad. At this time they were sailing on a ship. Sebas looked into the distance and said, Elvrand will appear soon, Gaius-san. He noticed and smelled the wind of change and thanked everyone. Sat on the deck and said how he longed to see everything with his own eyes. What is he like, this Kakyu? A few days ago, the Borkley estate, the Kakyu mansion. She had been cleaning near the dragon's cage, calling him and asking, after all, only a year ago they were treated as dangerous weapons. Did he remember? And now, they were allowed to work as maids in the estate of the aristocrat himself, the Viscount, I think. She stopped near the cage, closed her eyes, crossed her arms and continued. Lord Kakyu had not only saved them, he had given them and their mother a job, and he was so kind. And Lady Elsa was so happy when she said she wanted to become a scholar, and now she was teaching her herself. The dragon answered in his own language, but Lord Kakyu had calculated everything, and Lady Elsa was very scary when she was angry. She told him not to say that, and then she heard someone calling her. She turned around and saw Ars, who raised his hands up and shouted, he came to help. Is there any work for him? She said disappointedly, alas, they had just finished. Besides, taking care of boars is her job. She can't give it to him, Ars. He shouted that he wanted to be useful too. She suggested that if he wanted to help, he should ask Mr. Kakyu and the others. He replied that everything was so complicated, he didn't understand anything. She said thoughtfully, right, we need help that even a child could handle. He said if he looked at Daddy's work, maybe he would understand. She leaned towards him and shouted, right? Yura suggested that they go and take a secret look. He asked in surprise, can we? Later they arrived. This is the house of Lord Kakyu and his wife, but they are almost never here during the day. Due to their duties, they go to Ifuru, where the city and castle of the ruler are located. They approached the front door, and Yura added, it takes many hours to walk to Ifuru. Then she turned the key, the door opened, they looked in, and she said, but if you use the special key for servants that Lord Kakyu entrusted them with. Borkley's domain, the ancient city of Ifuru. He raised his hands up and shouted, here they come. She raised her hand to her forehead and said, unbelievable, Lord Kakyu's magic key. Then they entered the room, saw the protagonist and Elsa talking. She waved her hand at him to be quiet. Elsa said with the help of Pamora's reconnaissance squad they uncovered the trade routes that Vitra used. The protagonist picked up the document, looked at it carefully, grinned and said, Jural Rit, Jizaria? They exported so far? She said it seems there was an armed clash with demons in the kingdom of Jural. He raised his hand to his chin and said thoughtfully, in Jural he didn't know. Elsa asked, the kingdom of Jural is his homeland, isn't it, sir? He replied, yeah, so that's what Arno was talking about then. She added, they also conducted market research and found records of their competitors' activities. He said in surprise, wow, and the Sevastor Trading Company too? Is this the most recent data? She replied, it should be 10 days old. He asked, is there data from 3 years ago? She agreed and added, there is data from 4 years ago, then asked, sir? He scratched his chin and remarked, wow, what terrible things he came up with, Sir Sebas. Here Ars quietly asked, I wonder what they were talking about. She answered that she was interested. The protagonist exclaimed, this is going to be a shopping trip. Ars shouted in surprise, shopping trip. Then he went to the middle of the room and said, let him do a shopping trip. That's how they ended up in the present. He and Bors brought Ars to the place for his mission. He was sitting on the dragon's back. He was flying high above the trees, and Ars shouted, okay, let's get down somewhere around here, Bors. He was about to jump, turned around and shouted, then he was going. He wished him to be careful and not to go with strangers. He answered, okay. Then he grabbed onto a tree branch, jumped off, pushed off another, jumped over and thus reached the city. A little earlier, Yura called on Mini Kakyu. He answered, hello? She asked, Lord Kakyu? And added that Ars was on his way. He thanked her, said that he understood. And now she needs to move away from Mini Kakyu a little. She was surprised. At that moment she heard a scream. So in order to follow the execution of his beloved son's first mission, he begins a surveillance operation. Then he put his hand forward and shouted, Ars Defense Squad. It's time to move out, Elsa screamed. He's annoying. So could he please stop this stupid show? The port city of Pamora, the city gate. Ars approached the gate, and the guard greeted him, said, hello kid, and asked, what is his business? He smiled and replied, he has an errand from Viscount Borkrai. The guard let him pass, then waved his hand and told him to be careful. Ars waved his hand back and shouted, okay. Later, they approached the guard, and the protagonist put coins in his hands and thanked him for his assistance, and added, everything went according to plan. He said, if they are going to disguise themselves, they should act more confidently. Lord Ruler, otherwise this looks like some kind of suspicious transaction. He said, so, Mission 01, entering the city, completed. She added, next is Mission 02, shopping at the market. At this time, Ars was walking through the market, stopped at one counter, extended his hand and asked for 3 tubers of cos potatoes, 10 gappa leaves, and 1 bag of elbot flour and paid. The saleswoman smiled and asked, an errand? And what a fine fellow, and counted out the money evenly. Simply amazing. Ars took the bag and thanked her. She praised him again. What a nice boy. And here's a present for him. She continued to praise him. Oh, what a cutie. Let him take this too. What a clever boy. No need for payment. Let him just take it. What a fine fellow. He can take anything. He walked down the street, smiling contentedly and carrying bags full of purchases in his hands. The protagonist saw Ars say to the saleswoman, Auntie, this product is spoiled, so she should lower the price. She replied, it has such a pattern. Afterwards, he raised his hand to his mouth and said in displeasure, too many gifts, and somehow they charged him triple the price. Elsa said, it's his own fault, sir. With the elite education that she gave him, he is smarter than kids 10 years older than him. And besides, he's the cutest child in the world. So it's only natural. Yura thought, parental pride. They walked behind him, she said. The problem is the next mission, Mission 03, buying a slave from the Sevastor Trading Company. Yura asked, is this the bigger purchase that Sir was talking about? He agreed and noted, if his calculations are correct, the war with demons in the kingdom of Jural, records of the Sevastor Company's activities, and 1 rumor. If you add durability, information, and compare the facts, one possibility emerges that a certain big shot who meets his requirement may currently be in Pomor as a slave. Elsa clarified, in other words, Ars's job is to confirm the existence of this man, and if possible, make him their ally. She said in surprise, "Isn't that too difficult?" The protagonist grabbed his head, agreed, and shouted, "This was originally a job for adults." At that moment, Elsa called him and said, "He is spoiling Ars too much." They had already discussed everything in detail a few days ago. She remembered how Elsa shouted, "Ars can handle it." And the protagonist shouted back, "It's too early." She said, "It was a heated argument then." He said, "It's been a long time since he felt the difference in value between the earth and this world so acutely." Elsa watched him and said, "Ars is already the heir to an aristocratic family. He should deepen his understanding of his position and society from an early age. With Ars's strength, the bad crime situation will not be a problem, and above all, she wants to respect what he himself wanted to do." The protagonist said that he completely agreed, but if it became dangerous, he would immediately come to the rescue. She replied, "Of course, that's what surveillance is for. Savastor Trading Company, Pomor branch." Meanwhile, Ars approached the door and said, he apologizes. The door opened, and the guard asked, "A child?" He smiled and shouted that he came to buy slaves. The guard asked in surprise, "Alone?" He agreed. The guard asked, "Master Ars?" Then she appeared at the door. The guard raised his head and said, "Director?" Ars saw her and shouted, "Mistress Rihanna." She closed her eyes, smiled and replied, "We haven't seen each other for a year. He's grown so much." Rihanna Savastor, manager of the Savastor Trading Company Pomor branch. She leaned towards him and asked, how can she help him today? He replied that he came to buy a strong master slave. Then he asked, "Is Master Sibas here?" She smiled and replied, "The master is now at the main office in Marlance." He was surprised and shouted, and Dad said that he was here. That Sibasama and a strong man named Guy-sama would be here, right? The guard looked at her in surprise. She turned around and told him to bring the owner and him. He bowed his head and agreed. The protagonist smiled and shouted, "That's great! He's really here." She said thoughtfully, "Guy?" She seemed to have heard that name somewhere. He's a celebrity, a native of the Dragon Kingdom, a former S-class adventurer, the hero known as the Giant Slayer and the greatest warrior of humanity, Guy. At this time, they all entered the room. His eyes were covered by a mask. The debtor slave, Guy, a former S-class adventurer. He saw him, spread his arms out to the sides and shouted, "Big muscular." He had never seen such a huge man among humans. Guy asked, a childish voice. Sebas was standing next to him, smiled and said, "He's the star of their new branch." They were going to keep it a secret until the right time, but it was hard to refuse the master, Kakyu. She wondered if S-class was that cool. Elsa explained that the adventurer rank was not only an indicator of strength, but mainly the ability to easily complete missions of the same threat level. In other words, Guy at least has enough power to single-handedly crush an S-level threat like Vitra. She listened carefully. The protagonist added, "Along with that power comes the experience of a first-class adventurer, a polished technique, and a personality, a much-needed talent." She asked why such a person became a slave. He answered, "Probably because of those eyes." Guy apologized for his choice, but his eyes were blinded by the curse of demons. He could not see anything. As a warrior, he was almost useless, then asked if he was okay with it. He happily agreed and asked, because in fact, he can see, right? He asked, "Does he think he is lying?" Ars disagreed and added, "He doesn't see, but it looks like he sees. He doesn't know, but..." Suddenly he rushed to attack, jumped up and shouted, "Everything will become clear in battle." At the same second, Guy put his hands up, held back the blow. The boy shouted, "He sees after all." He shouted that he is a brave guy. Sebas loudly said that they should fight outside. Okay? They went outside and they watched, and Yura put her hand to her mouth and shouted. They went outside. A fight? Elsa shouted that they should be stopped. The protagonist told her to wait. Guy laughed loudly and shouted that he adored young talents. Let him come to him, a rough diamond. Ars was delighted and shouted, "Really? Hooray, he will accept his lesson." He stretched his hands forward and said, "Electric cannon." At that moment, electric charges were directed towards Guy. He raised his hands, covered his face and asked, "Lightning?" Then he shouted, his style is a fist of emptiness. Tearing apart the sky, pushing off he flew forward and Ars tried to resist him and screamed in fear. And Yura raised her hands and shouted, "He cut lightning?" She asked in surprise, "What kind of magic is this?" Elsa replied that she didn't understand either. The protagonist said that he didn't feel any special magical power, but the lightning changes its trajectory before it touches Guy's hand, the path of the true sky. Lightning bends and zigzags in the air because the current goes to more rarefied areas. That is, Guy with his speed and strength literally pushes the air apart and directs the lightning along the created corridor. Not bad power, Guy, but his magic hasn't reached the level of art yet. Then Ars flew down. Guy saw this and ran after him, tried to grab him, couldn't hold on, he flew further down. Elsa screamed in fear, "Ars!" The protagonist looked at her and told her not to worry. At that moment, Guy accelerated and ran after him with all his might, grabbed him and this time was able to hold him. Then he exhaled, apologized and added, "The first fight after blindness, miscalculated the strength," and asked him, "Is he okay?" Ars looked at him with his big eyes and shouted happily, "Okay, that was great." Seriously, afterwards, the protagonist scratched his chin and said, he needs a martial arts and swordsmanship instructor for their mercenary squad, a home tutor so that Ars will no longer fight recklessly. Although he is blind and retired, Guy is perfect. The price is high, but unwanted clients can be rejected. Afterwards he asked, "Well, Ars, how will he negotiate?" He walked up to Guy, took his hand and shouted, "Master Guy, he wants him to be his friend." The onlookers covered their mouths so that their laughter could not be heard. Guy laughed loudly and added, "Friend, then great." Then he asked, "What is his name, Guy?" He shouted happily, "Ars." Guy added, "The name is like that of a hero of old, a good omen, an amazing meeting. As a baby's sneeze can cause a storm across the sea, so the actions of strangers circle and decide our fates, but he believes that this is a great meeting." Then he added, "Agreed, they are now friends." He extended his hand and said loudly, "He is glad to meet you." Then they shook hands. Now what is happening before his eyes, a small choice, will one day become a great destiny.